A lot of people don't understand. We can't be anything but black. I met a black student who goes to a black college because they don't like white people. We have black colleges for the same reason that Jews have Yeshiva and Brandeis, for the same reason that Catholics have Holy Cross and Notre Dame, for the same reason that the Mormons have an entire state called Utah that they have no intention of giving back to the United States. Because we live in a culturally pluralistic society. Now, we are going to have to teach, we who are black, are going to have to teach everyone in this society that a desegregated society means respect for everyone and every group, equality of movement, and the ability of any black student to go to any white university, the ability of any white student to go to any black university, the ability for any Jew to go to any Catholic institution, etc. That's the segregation. The segregation does not mean the elimination of black culture. A lot of people don't understand. We can't be anything but black. And we can use all the words we want, desegregate, integrate, merge. We still are going to be black. And we who are black have decided we're not going to let anybody destroy our colleges because we cannot survive in America without them. Only 20% of black students go to black colleges. 80% of black students go to white colleges. But 7 out of 10 of the black students who go to black college graduate. 7 out of 10 black students who go to white colleges never graduate in graduate programs at white universities. 75% of all the advanced degrees go to black students who went to black colleges. That's when black students from black colleges and black students from white colleges get together and compete. 3/4 of the advanced degrees go to those from black colleges. 1 out of every 250 black athletes at a white university graduates. The University of Georgia has graduated 6 black athletes since 1971. We're not finishing white colleges. And if we don't have black colleges, we're not going to graduate. We're not going to have a leader.
Good everything.
Good everything. Good everything. How are you?
I'm good. And rest in power. I'm so glad that you started with Tony Brown.
Yeah, we haven't really talked about him much in this space, but his words seem particularly poignant today.
Yeah. Grew up with him.
Talk to us about that. Yeah.
I mean, not literally, but he was on my TV. And as I think about it, nobody was in the room watching him with me. And I was little.
Really?
Yeah. Like, no, it's not like my parents put him on the TV and made me watch him. And I just remember, maybe I was 11, watching him on Tony Brown's Journal. And then it'd be Gil Noble, like it is on Sunday.
Yeah.
I just gravitated towards that. And something about his command.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he made me feel good.
Well, you weren't alone. I mean, it sounds like to me you might predate TBJ. You may predate Tony Brown's Journal then if you were as a little one. What was
black
commentary or something?
Maybe it was a teenager, but I do remember being in my parents' bedroom because they had a big TV watching him on it. So I don't know how old.
But you remember the moniker, because of course when you think about him in context of Gil Noble and Ellis Hazlett and others, that was the New York area, and then DC was, what was it, black commentary or something like that. And then it turned.
I don't know what to say. Like
DC. Well, it turned into Tony Brown's Journal because
that was national. It's weird because we had like 3 channels.
Right.
And then there were the off channels like 11 and 9. But you would think that because we were all watching the same thing at the same time, mostly, that everybody was watching the same things. But, when you go to college, you realize, oh, y'all weren't watching the same things we were watching in the tri-state area. And then you get a sense that the country isn't all on the same page. It's kind of the first time because you think wherever you are is what everybody else is doing. And we had more of that when we were younger. But now I don't know what people are doing.
Well, I mean, now it seems like you said, everything is everywhere all the time, relatively speaking. So yeah, you are an embarrassment of riches in the Northeast and along the Eastern Seaboard, at least as far south as DC. And then, of course, as those things break out and become syndicated or at least available, Ellis Hazlett and Soul Train, Cornelius, which comes out of in the Midwest. And then, of course, as you say, Bob Law, who never went national in that sense, although I guess it was not Bob Law, as you said, Gil Noble, as ABC affiliate, but New York, I never heard of Gil Noble, none of us in the South until I was a grown man and moving back and forth between the East Coast and the Midwest. But Tony Brown, you're right. Tony becomes a national figure, and out of DC, especially when he gets there, and becomes the founding dean of Howard School of Communications. He was the first dean, James Cheek. When they were building what they thought then would be the Black University as a very deliberate concept, and then WHUT, as they acquired that PBS license, it becomes, you can inject into the bloodstream. Now you've got that fourth lane that we talk about, ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS. It's like, wow, all of a sudden it just opens up. I mean, I think it's truly remarkable, even as we think here and now, because you've curated in Sirius a lane that is very deliberately open and inquisitive and inviting, and it wants just principle that there is an HBCU Sirius channel. And it's not, I mean, I don't know, but anyway, and it sits at Howard University, crazily enough.
I just had a conversation with somebody about that channel because, early on when we were talking about programming Urban View,
Mm-hmm.
they also had me meet with Wayne Frederick to, do something with that, maybe involved in that. And there was, I felt a level of frustration because the vision for that channel could be so amazing.
And
I'm going to say less. Because
no, I'm gonna say a little more.
I know you are. I know you are. I'm going
to say absolutely.
I'm going.
But anyway, yes, ma'am. You should say. But you have the. You saw, right? You see.
But
right?
It's all of us with quote unquote platforms, because that's the other thing. Tony Brown, Gil Noble, all of the folk had to kind of comply with the outlets that they had. There was no YouTube, there was no TikTok, there was no Instagram, there was no there weren't just these democratized spaces where you could just pop in, your little, hit press play or record and pop your little image up and do, produce. You were inside of a construct, and we're inside of a construct on SiriusXM, which is great, but it's almost similar to that where you get to curate your spaces. And to me, if I have access to a channel that says HBCU, it's an HBCU channel.
HBCU, not one HBCU.
Yeah, no, I know where you're going. The small imagination of that space hurts my heart, is all I'll say. The fact that you have access to all of these beautiful young people coming through and the faculty, and this is what you produce. This is what you produce. And then you're like resistant to a bigger vision, because it's also somehow about control. Like, it's weird to me that people care more about power and control than they do to actually do the job, which is to educate people. That's the job, right? Because it's right there.
Is it the job though?
That is the job. That's the job. That's
not for a lot of people.
I know, and that's what's sad. Okay,
Yeah,
the first time I learned that college presidents, their main job is fundraising. Because I like many of my students thought, oh, you're the college president, you're there to have the vision for the college. No, your whole job is to bring in money. But even if you're bringing in money, the money should be for a purpose. I think about Booker T. Washington, all the barbs that he gets. To give a wing to George Washington Carver is vision. Like, this man, let that man give him all the resources he needs.
As long as he was the fuel of the engine of Tuskegee. That's a complicated. I agree. Washington gets, I think, an unfair amount of smoke for people who don't really study him. I remember my friend Vincent Franklin years ago. I was on a panel with him, and I was, because I'm part of Tuskegee. My mom was born down the road from Tuskegee, and I love Tuskegee. And Dr. Franklin very firmly, gently, collegially reminded that yes, and there were ideological forces at play that caused him to be a little less charitable toward Washington. To this day, I think I'm probably more charitable toward Washington than a lot of people. And I think some of that has to do with being an African from the South, seeing and working exclusively in Black spaces and seeing that value. And yes, during that period, he was very encouraging and supportive of Washington. And I wonder if Washington had the temperament of, say, an Ernest Just or Percy Julian, if it had been the same, because Carver was such a very very his way of knowing was just so very generous and at the same time very humble.
Yeah.
And he didn't look for a penny, which
Right.
worked to his
I see what
advantage in
you're
the long
saying.
run.
I see
Yeah,
what you're saying. I'm just looking at, the end results, and, as
of course, of course.
we examine people as they make transition, we lean into picking out the parts that aggrieve us, that make us, feel, and then we highlight that. But it's like Tuskegee still stands.
Still stand.
It still stands. It's still
Still
doing
stands.
some things.
Still vibrant.
So one man had a vision. It's our responsibility, just like with the politicians. And I'm really saying more than just, it should never fall on one person to be able to shape anything, right? So you have an idea, but just like we talk about Nubia, bring a brick, build
Sure.
a thing, build a wing. Like, this is not coming out of just one or two people. This is now an opportunity to imagine what this thing can be. And my imagination is here. But if your imagination is big over there, then now we get to meet somewhere and then the whole thing gets bigger. But I think too many people want to control the entire process and they don't want the thing to get any bigger than them. And I think that's sad.
No, I agree with you, of course, and I think that one of the anchoring kind of tenets of what we do here together is to remind ourselves and to remind each other, not only each other, but everybody who's here with us, and welcome everybody here always, of that momentum of memory, and to say that we've been here before, but then we haven't been here before, and that we've thought about and discussed at length these things. And what seems to diminish with us losing that memory, that very specific nature of memory, is that we end up getting farther and farther away from those principles. Because yes, God knows Washington had an ego, but as you said, it wasn't just his vision. It's every human being who was there, all those people buried in the cemetery outside the Tuskegee Chapel. And together, their commitment to the race is the thing that couldn't be questioned, ego aside. But the farther we get from that moment, and that had been poured into them by those who were in captivity, but the further we get from it, the more we look like the social structure that is absolutely committed completely to individualism.
Is that inevitable? Because
No, can't be.
I'm looking around, and I feel like it's not this. It can't be this hard, But time and time again, I watch people fall into this. You're doing the same thing. Like I've had to challenge people who are working with me. Yes, okay, I have businesses, but I'm not modeling business as it. You know what I'm saying?
Oh. Yes.
You know better than most.
I know. Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes,
and
ma'am.
I don't ever want somebody to have to beg for a raise or come in and do it's structured in such a way that you validate what people are bringing in. You're not lording over them. There's no kind of hierarchical structure and corporate speak and all, because that to me stifles creativity. And what I want is creativity. And it's the greatest compliment. Yesterday somebody called up to compliment Smiz, my producer. And they're like, oh, I don't even want to talk to you and Rod. I just want to talk to Smiz and thank him. Because I had a stroke and he doesn't speak on the mic,
Mm-hmm.
But from day one, I gave him autonomy to create within the framework of this show. Bring your brick. And whatever you need to do it. I'm not going to get in the way, even if you make a mistake or whatever, we'll deal with it later. But 10 years in, it has been an amazing, to watch. And it's across the board, right? I look at, little Jonah, who's taking charge of different things, and Amina, Alexa, and it's a beautiful thing to watch people put their wings on and fly. And I don't have to tell them, do this, do that, do this, because to succeed, you need everybody's input who's coming in and imagining what else is needed here. And that's the challenge of what's needed that I can't see, bring it. And if you make a mistake, this is part of learning. There are no failures. Okay, oops, we'll get it over. As long as you ain't do it willfully, we'll figure it out. The audience is going to give us grace, and we'll keep growing. I mean, that's everything. And I hate that we live in a culture where, somebody sits on a throne and everybody's kowtowing to that person who's usually very limited and mediocre. And they got there, I don't know how, because somebody liked them. There's all these
This society rewards mediocrity. In fact, it is the best thing for a lot of us. The more mediocre you are, the less of a threat you are, and the more easier it is to entice you into a situation where you can be pumped up, at least for the non-white folk and the poor whites and others. Once you get to a certain level, the incompetence is the point. I think that's why I say the only DEI, the only affirmative action in this society, in a racial capitalist society, is whiteness. But for us, mediocrity is the point, right? I just wish that, no, not wish. Let me displace that. Because, when Tony Brown wrote his first book, 1995, and he writes about these classes, what he calls these classes of Black America. And I wonder how you would react to, it's called Black Lies, White Lies, which is part of why I call it Black Odysseys, White Facts is the book.
Yeah, I got that book. My daddy had that book. Yes.
Oh yeah, it's just and it's interesting in it because you see people like even in his obituaries, including the New York Times, they talk about him taking this conservative turn late in life, and of course, using an Africana studies approach, like you all are so clearly, so deeply uninformed about who African people are. We don't fit in the conservative liberal category. We don't fit in the radical socialist communist category. We don't fit in you want to pigeonhole us in social structure language, and I understand why. But you're so deeply uninformed. We shouldn't be listening to those people. But when he says, and I wonder how you respond to this, he says, you got these tribes of Black America. He says there's the talented 10th, the most influential Black professional intellectual class. That's kind of some of what he's talking about in that term, the HBCUs. And he says some of those people are very clear about their anti-Black identity. And many are 10 toes down Black people, as we would say, and they're really trying to advance the race, but they're doing it with a very deep class mentality. Then he says there's what he calls the bomb, the Black unaccountable machine. He said, just as the early assimilationist NAACP's original mission was literally for the advancement of certain colored people, the literal function of today's Black leadership is to serve as a shield for white liberalism and its institutions. Shout out to the NAACP finishing up their convention in Chicago. The third he calls the Black masses. He says that's the majority. Many in this rank and file category are marginally middle class, others are poor and working class, and about at that time 2 million are in the underclass. What they have in common is that they are exploited by their own Black leaders. Then he calls number 4 of the last one, the John the Baptist Brigade. He says the fourth tribe is perhaps the least visible and is all but unknown in the white community. It works mostly behind the scenes, with the exception of a few warriors who openly battle with the talented 10th elitists and the liberal white racists. I consider myself one of the more confrontational members of this tribe. We come from all 3 of the aforementioned groups, the talented 10th and the Black masses, and even a handful who have escaped the graft of the bum crowd and fled the plantation. We are modern day Maroons, the revolutionaries during slavery who escaped the slave plantation. So he's got these 4 categories, and I'm thinking this is 1995. This is like 40 years ago, and you think, or 30 years ago, and you think, now, what you gonna do with that in the obituary? See, he's turning conservative. No, that ain't what he's saying. So I mean, how do you respond and react to that? I'm thinking about even with the HBCU channel, which I have sat with. I mean, one time I was down at Russ College, another time I was over at Shaw, and sitting with people who have given their lives, decades of their lives, in HBCU radio, WFSK at Fisk, and they talked about the possibilities of a network of HBCU, including some of, quite frankly, the people who fought for and envisioned this Sirius XM channel. And lastly, people at WHUR who are no longer there, who go all the way back to that Tony Brown era, who go back and say, this was the vision. And so it's, to me, Prof, I mean, how do you react to those categories? And how do you think about the fact that the memory doesn't even have to go back to ancient Egypt or even reconstruct? It can go back 30 years with people who are still here who can say, wait, let's unblock this memory. This was never, how do we,
I'm going to throw another. Why do we need to categorize ourselves? Like, to me, it's a real simple thing. You asked the question, Tony K. Bombara asked the question, do we really want to be healed? Do we really want to be healed? Do we really want to know? Do we really want to be educated? Do we really want to have a community? Do we really, I feel like there's a lot of yelling into the void, and people are in their corners and, you know, they're holding on to something that feels comfortable to them. At the same time, they're sitting in discomfort. They don't really have answers, but everybody wants to act like they have answers, and they don't. And they're not really working towards solutions, because solutions require sitting quietly, studying, reading, imagining, coming together, pulling resources wherever you can. I struggle with this, as I don't know that you do, because I come from.
No, I don't struggle.
Yeah, you don't. I come from my parents, of course, were, Jack and Jill and all this other stuff. And, they would go out, and I see the people going out to the vineyard and all of the things. And
it's about that time, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, and the things and the people with the things and the, having the right car and the right, zip code and all of the things. And, having the right, the right mink and all of the things. And the right schools.
Not the right mink.
Yeah, the right mink and all of the things, you got to go to the right schools, or else you won't, be successful. And now we're confronting what is success, as all of the people who did the right things are finding themselves in the crosshairs of a society that never really saw you as anything other than a wedge, an opportunity. The fact that the governor of Texas can get on the mic and evoke Black people, like poke Black people. I said, has that man ever said anything about Black people? He brought up Black people.
Of course.
I said, oh, and then I had the nerve to see Black people in my, comments agreeing with him. I said,
of course,
ma'ams and sirs,
an entire race.
Are you okay?
A race of children, an entire race of children.
Like, y'all.
This is why I say people get mad at me. I'm like, prove me wrong. Don't get mad.
My God.
Get smart. A race of children.
He's got a point. And I was like, oh, got you. He got you. He got you. And is it that easy to get you? Is it that easy to get you?
Absolutely.
To come up your own foot in your nose and to walk around noseless and footless? It's that, Dr. Carr. So beyond the categories right now, I think we just need to simplify it. I start my show, and I try to say this every show. Everybody listening to my voice, you live somewhere. You live somewhere. Instead of trying to go fix the trans people in the bathroom, where you live, because I doubt a single trans person. I doubt you've been in the bathroom with one, or on a playing field with one.
Well, if you did, nobody said it.
Okay.
And it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Even if you did.
It matters. I don't want to compete with them. Anyway, let's put that over there. But
that's a category.
Is that stopping you from working, from eating, from having clean air and water, from having good schools? And if the answer is no, because that's all politics is. So how did they introduce that into a political conversation that has you so animated that you won't even show up to vote for your own rights and resources? That's wild to me. And if we can get through that and simplify it, you live someplace, what do you need? If you don't know what you need, then you've already failed, because that means you're not in community. You haven't walked your neighborhood. You don't know your neighbors. You don't know what is necessary in your community. And once you figure that out, then who is responsible to get us, whether it's potholes filled, there's all these empty buildings and empty lots. Who's responsible for that? And now organize around those things that you need where you live. And if you can't do that, Tony Brown brought up Utah, and I said, damn, these people went and took over a whole state, and they got 2 senators, and it wasn't a lot of. I don't even think it's 1 million of them. Took over a whole entire state. They have 2 senators.
They had the Utes out there, so it wasn't a whole lot of people, but the people who were there, they had to help. But how do people? Why do people work in that fashion and become obsessed? It's people who would tell them to focus on the hyperlocal. Right? It was people who would say, you should look at your family and your community. But those people telling them that, they use categories. In other words, all a category does is give some order to the living and dying every day, and to give some speed to people who are looking for explanations. That's why we continue to talk about points of entry. A category is a port of entry. In other words, I see the world. I'm hungry. I need something to eat. I don't make enough money. My child is sick. Or look, we got an award. You got a little paper from school. All those are the living and dying. And then they say, well, how do I make sense of this? Somebody comes in and says, well, I've been thinking about this. You're in this class. They're in that class. And then if you say it long enough, they say, yeah, I'm in this class. Yeah, people don't think they're being categorized, but that's absolutely what categories are. Right. I'm a Christian. I'm a Muslim. So how do you fight that? You probably need some categories of your own. That's why. That's why we. I mean, or not. I mean, you know.
About that, because I think it also allows us to otherize, right? Because if I'm in this category, I'm not in that category,
Well, that's
and
where worldview comes in.
and then it's like, well, they're in that category, those bougie, or those lower class, and now we get to point the finger and separate ourselves. As long as I'm not over there, I'm not like them. And I'm thinking we're all in this pot together, breathing the same dirty, filthy ass air with the same diseases and eating the same damn food that may give you explosive diarrhea. It's not picking and choosing categories.
Well,
You're all in it. So
that's right.
if we're going to be all in it, then let's figure out how to make it better for everybody, no matter what your category. But I hear what you're saying. I don't know how we get away from that, because we're all human, living an experience, and we're not bound by the borders and the boundaries that other people put us in, right? Like, you and I are black, but what does that mean? What does that really mean?
I mean, I use black because it's a common language, a common word, and it's a category, but I'm absolutely not black, and neither are you. But we know that that's the racialization. I mean, after all this time, we know the answer. That's a social structure rendering. I mean, the social structure, the governance structure and ways of knowing and all that, those attempts at categories are absolutely worthless if we don't use them. And we continue to refer to ourselves in ways that reinforce our oppression. Not that we shouldn't use those terms, because that's the terms that have been pressed upon us, but there are points of entry to getting past that. I listen to people, I read a lot of these people talking about, this one is not a real communist, or this one's not a real socialist, and the democratic socialists aren't real socialists. And I say all of that, I, agree with if you're talking about theory, strict theory. But when you're talking about categories that separate us, that's not natural. It's not natural. It comes out of a particular cultural grounding. And when we think about how we can fight back, repetition is a great part of this, and continuing to refer to these points of entry that will help us slowly extricate ourselves. But remember that if we're not doing that, we are surrounded by other categories that reinforce themselves and have the advantage of being the categories we were born into. So it's counterintuitive to push back against those things, because we think about them. It's what Sadie Robinson might refer to as the terms of order. In other words, this is the world we've been. I'll give you a perfect example. Now, it took me a minute because I was trying to get some things up. Shout out to all the people who finished up summer school this week at the various places, and now getting ready to move into the fall semester. And we'll talk about that too, including the debacle of what happened at Howard, which isn't unique to Howard. But so I got a chance at a late show to go slip in the back and watch the Odyssey. Now, we both seen it. And I thought it was, hey, beautiful gowns. But I know too much about the narrative to understand. So I sit there and understand, okay, you're never going to stop making this film. Elon Musk is a deeply mediocre human being. And his racism it blinds him to the fact that you don't need an AI generated version of this thing. This is a white narrative, and you reinforce its cultural whiteness by casting it in as many colors as you can, because you're not changing the underlying assumptions, the ways of knowing of the West, the cultural. You're not changing any of it. In fact, what you've done is put a black face on it. So the idea that everybody in the world fights everybody else is not only not displaced by a film like this, it is reinforced, because now you done pulled our asses into it and say, yeah, everybody fights everybody. You didn't know that? So I wonder how many, when it's shown in China, if it will be interpreted as an epic drama or as a comedy. Because the whole idea, the Chinese looking at this like, look at them, look at these, and they now they got the black people involved. Now these Negroes is killing each other and sexing it up. And look at this. And I imagine the indigenous people, Native Americans, people, the Aboriginals, the people they look at this and say, wow, look at this. Look at all these women who are now white. And look at the white women, and look at the fact that, with the exception of the one time when the queen tells the sellout servant to get out, no woman talks to another woman in that whole movie. They all talking to men. Look at the patriarchy.
Wow.
I mean, in other words, this is beautiful. I mean, they reinforce it. Elon, don't touch it, man. You don't need, if you touch it, this is where you run the risk. You run the risk of us finally seeing this is a white people story. The values are white. I wonder what the kind of Africans who haven't been brainwashed looking at this saying, look at this right here. This man's whole thing is to get back to his wife. He done lost all his people. What are his values? Damn them. And look at the witches. Oh man, Nollywood would have a ball with the Odyssey. Why? You got witches turning people into pigs. You got that. And then you got the mute black woman looking over here. Nothing like Mami Wata. Nothing like Yemiya Oshun. Nothing like, because Yemiya Oshun would never be mute looking with pain on her face like they got the young girl looking like Athena, just looking like this what women do in the Western society. You ain't gonna tell your son what to do. No, I'm just gonna look at him like, Zendaya, come on, Miss Johnson. You just look like, I'm sorry. You're looking like, you are literally Athena, although your name is borrowed from the Egyptians. And you can't talk, you can't say this, man. No, because this is a Western story. Women are less than men. Even the goddess is less than the man. And I'm like, look at so
I'm so glad I didn't see this movie with you.
What? No, but see, this is what we're talking about. If we don't, why don't you?
Because I got to enjoy the majesty of it without having to think.
This is what Tony.
To escape.
You just quoted Tony Cade in the Salt Eaters. Are you saying you don't want to be well?
Oh my God!
No, you don't want to be well. If you say, "Oh, I'm so glad I don't get to be well," I want to watch this.
I got to enjoy the movie, and now I'm gonna get the
beautiful gowns. I mean, I'm the advocate. It's a perfect example. But don't worry, we're gonna get into it today. We're gonna talk about the Odyssey and myth making.
Okay.
Black Odysseys, white facts. This is what we got.
All right. So do you go to every, first of all, seeing August Wilson with you was enlightening.
Okay? Oh, it was wonderful. And shout out to them. I think, is Sunday the last day? I think it's the last day of the run, isn't it, Proud? Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Yeah, there was an article in the New York Times about the Romari Bearden mural that inspired him. So I think today, that whole cast, oh my God, wasn't it wonderful?
That was wonderful.
And thank you, by the way. Thank you for that. Again.
I got to see the Odyssey, and it was growing up reading mythology. And then we think about, oh man, you're messing me up this morning, because how much of everything that we know, and this is, you said we can't avoid it. How much of everything we know is somebody else's myth making?
No question.
That we have to insinuate ourselves in because we're in society. So you're saying it's unavoidable. And if we challenge every single thing, we're gonna have to challenge every single thing.
That's right.
Then we'll be left with nothing.
Well, no. Oh no.
No. I'm not saying in this realm. In the social structure, but we got all our governance. That's what got us to where we are. And how many of us know the governance stories?
Well, using that category, I would say all of us. Okay. Because there are Africana ways of knowing. There's culture, meaning. That's the whole point of the framework, to reveal to us that the thing that they have tried to convince us we lost has been the thing that kept us out of the abyss. Absolutely. In fact, my favorite telling of the Odyssey by white people is "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" You ever seen that movie?
Yes.
That's the Odyssey. That's the Odyssey. And we're going to go through it. That's the Odyssey. They took it from the Odyssey. Coen Brothers claim they hadn't read the Odyssey, but then again, it's the West, so I think they're probably lying. But the whole point is that whole film is white on white crime, and there are only a couple of black points of entry. The young brother, Chris King, who at the time was playing the version of Robert Johnson, Tommy Johnson, and we'll talk about that, and the Fairfield Four at the end who say, you got to go to the Lonesome Valley. You got to go there by yourself. The rest of it is basically white on white class crime. Odysseus is revealed for who he is, or Ulysses. They use the other rendering. Who was George Clooney playing? This guy ain't no hero. He's a slick talking dude looking for his hair pomade, trying to save his wife from this other crook who got $5 to stick together. Who are his boys? They're not loyal soldiers and valiants. Them cats escaped from a prison. And so what they're doing is critiquing the Odyssey. It's beautiful. It's white on white crime. Meanwhile, black people are along for the ride. The brother's just like, man, I'm just trying to get out of this thing right here. And and it's beautiful. And remember, it's no Travis Scott in a chef's kiss minstrel, in a chef's kiss minstrel cameo at the beginning and the end. Who opens and ends "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou"? A blind black man on a rail car coming up and down the road. Who ends it? Why? He's the seer. In our context, he would be the jolly. or what they call the griot, the French call the griot. Hey man, everything's going to be all right. There's divine order. This ain't like the European gods who basically are just like y'all, fighting each other, killing each other. What's
Raping.
Poseidon doing? Raping it? You're son of Poseidon. I'm gonna kill all y'all. That would never be the case in Africa. So in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It's interesting. The rejection of Christianity, them sirens call them into the water. The water is always salvific. So they get to, but then here come the siren song again, except they all going, when I went down to the river to pray. Yeah, you go in that water with that singing, your ass is done, except unlike the Odyssey, where it's the Greek sirens, here it's the Christians. Oh yeah, that Christianity gonna get you killed. Their relationship between Oh Brother, Where Art Thou and sinners. I don't think, in other words, yeah, so I love the Odyssey, not the Christopher Nolan or even the Homer, who there's no evidence there was ever a Homer. But Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Yeah, if I'm gonna watch the Odyssey, I'm gonna watch that again. You know what I'm
Or
saying?
Shakespeare. You know,
Well, there you go.
I'm listening to James now because my first personal
Mhm.
book was Trees, which I thought was also, you know, the imagination that it takes to take a story that we have been forced to read as a classic and reimagine it is what you're doing. But what you're also saying is that that's what they did with our stuff.
All the
And so
time.
we're just sitting in refried beans,
All the
basically,
time.
all the time. And we just
All
need
the
to
time.
get back to the source bean.
That's it. And we can. And we can. It is so close we can taste it, but it's going to require a little work.
Okay. Well,
You
let's
know,
get
I see. Yeah. Okay. Well, we working now. We working now. So we continue this week's session. We are continuing. Hold on. I'm going to take these out now there. Make sure that there's no echo. Echo in a minute when we come. There we go. So we're continuing along this line. We're continuing the semiquincentennial here in the United States, and welcome to everybody who's outside of the US as always. And we thought today we would start with Brother Brown because we hadn't marked yet his transition last month. And around this topic of Black Odysseys and White Facts, because we continue to think about and work toward political self-determination. And I don't even want to use the word political, self-determination and survival, cultural survival, physical, literal survival, as the weather continues to remind us that the species is on the verge of tearing up the planet. And we're also struggling in the United States against these nativist social structures, these white nationalist social structures. And, I read an interesting article in the New York Times a couple of days ago on electability. It was in the paper on the 17th. So last week, it talked about those majority Black districts being blown up by the increasingly desperate nativist politicians. And by the way, at least right now, the way you break the back of white nationalists in the ballot box is to break the back of white nationalists in the ballot box, to repurpose the silly-minded John Roberts, where you get rid of discriminating by races, get rid of discriminating by race. Okay, John Boy, to have risen to the Chief Justice of the United States of America and be so, I'd call you stupid. And I would have called you stupid before you threw away any notion of precedent stare decisis and the rule of law to become basically a political hack. I would have called you that before, I think, maybe just the mid intellect. But your work of the last several years has cemented you as stupid. But, remember when John Roberts said that Shelby County versus Holder, the voting rights case out of Alabama, so many of them come out of Alabama and Texas. But story for another day. We've talked about that many times. When Robert says, the way to get rid of discriminating by race is to get rid of discriminating by race. Okay. Well, the way to get rid of white nationalist power in the ballot box is to get rid of white nationalist power in the ballot box. If we had wanted Jasmine Crockett to be running against the racist Ken Paxton instead of James Tallarico, that was a simple way to do it. In fact, the only way to do it. Get out and vote. And I'm sorry, not nearly enough of us did, because if even 60% of us, not to mention like
3/4. If 3/4 of the people eligible in Texas of African descent to vote had gotten out to vote, Jasmine Crockett would be running against Ken Paxton. And if they then showed up again at the November election, let's say 75%, 3/4 of those eligible to vote, registered to vote, did that. It's a thought exercise at this point because it's moot, because, you know, Tillery goes the nominee. And I'm going to mention it here, and we don't need to speak about it again unless people want to bring it up Monday night in office hours. But if 3/4 of those same people had showed up, if 3/4 of the people eligible had come up in November to do that, once Crockett was the nominee, Senator Jasmine Crockett would be being sworn in at the top of 2027. We ain't going to talk no more about that. That's very simple. The way to break the back of white political power, what white nationalists is to, at the ballot box, is to do it. Not to talk about it, not to bemoan why we don't do it, but simply get your ass up, check your voter registration, jump through whatever hoop they've imposed so far, and do it. So I was reading this article in the New York Times last week on Black political power, and they have a picture of Lauren Underwood, who of course has been elected from a overwhelmingly white district in Illinois, and they follow with Milak Kiros, who we talked about, 29-year-old woman of African descent, born in Ethiopia, who is looks like is going to be elected to the Congress from the majority White House district in and around Denver. And then it goes on to talk about a number of other people. The third person profile, if memory serves me correctly, is the politically pliant blackface white nationalist Byron Donalds out of Florida, who is running for governor of Florida now. And the author makes the point of, regardless of political ideology, about half of the more than 60 elected Black members of Congress represent districts that either have a Black plurality, meaning Blacks are one of all minority groups. There's no majority group in the district, multi-ethnic constituencies. More than half of the 60 elected are in places where Black people are not a majority. So you ask yourself, what's going on? And something that the blackface white nationalist Byron Donalds said in the article was that the reason we don't need racial gerrymandering in the United States of America is because you're seeing Black candidates get elected in a lot of different places. He says it's not a party question, it's a question of values. And I'm sure that the inferior education, when he did go to class, that Mr. Donalds got at Florida State University after he transferred from the place where he had the best shot to get a real education, which was, of course, the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, FAMU, chasing whatever he was chasing at Florida State. I should have stayed at FAM since you were in Tallahassee, Byron. But you know, you would have gotten perhaps a little, maybe you've been hell-bent on going what you're doing now, but you would have gotten more insight into the fact that you're not wrong when it comes to the question of people voting for people that are more closely aligned with their values. But when you factor race in that, two things occur. Number one, the values that you extol are very much white nationalist coded, which makes you a little more palpable to white voters. But ultimately, in the larger scale of Black elected officials who are elected in majority white polities, your values aligning with white nationalist values is also, if not quite yet the kiss of death, a failing proposition when you compare your Yasa campaign, similar to Tim Scott in South Carolina, when you compare you all's alignment with values, the racial element of why these people are open to you really kind of comes in second to the racial element that is diminished in some ways when you get a Lauren Underwood or someone else whose values include more inclusive, more compassionate, more generous approaches to governing, expanding healthcare, expanding childcare, those kind of things. What you will find is there are many non-Blacks, many whites, not yet a majority in many places, certainly at the national level, but in those local levels, in those policies, there are many whites whose values align with that, those common humanity values, as opposed to your doubling and tripling, quadrupling down on white nationalist values. You'll find that's the second thing. The very thing that you think will allow these people to vote for you is also the very thing that will have them not turn out for you. So in the state of Florida, this is how you break the back of a blackface white nationalist political career and campaign. You do it by breaking the back of a blackface political figure at the ballot box. You check your registration, you go. Florida's not a red state, as William Barber might say, going nationwide and saying people must march to the polls together for 100 days. Let's do what we need to do. 100 days of concentrated work in that regard. In Louisiana, as Gary Chambers often says, those are under-organized states, under-mobilized states. They're not red or blue. There's not enough people participating. But even as these politicians of African descent continue to be elected, even in spaces where majority non-whites are not the majority, or not that are not majority non-white, it made me think. It didn't give me pause, but it made me think about this. What would it take ultimately for politicians of African descent campaigning for election when over half of the 60 currently in the federal legislature in the United States Congress are from polities that are not majority Black? Do we need majority Black districts? The answer to that is yes, we do. And the answer to that is no, we don't. It's not that simple. This is a question of assimilation. This is a question of integration. This is a question of desegregation. And ultimately, it is a question in the social structure of the United States of how you acquire political power and how you use political power for survival. Not survival in the context of what Brother Tony Brown in Black Lives, White Lies says, because the survival of the so-called talented 10th, which Dr. Du Bois critiqued almost as soon as he wrote that, and then 30 years later took it down even more to say maybe there's a guiding 100th, but that notion of the so-called Black elite, he says, he writes, Brown, Black elitism has never had much faith in the Black rank and file. I don't know that that's untrue. He says, when a Black millionaire can qualify for a program designed to help the economically disadvantaged, it is not affirmative action, it is upper crust welfare. He even talks about socialism in here, which I think is fascinating. He describes it as something in a different way. Again, this is Brown in 1995. He refers to it as entitlement socialism. He says, so when you say socialism, there's a lot of socialism for people who already have a material advantage. You can gain another material advantage based on the color of their skin or based on who they know in terms of the capitalists. There's a lot, hyper-capitalists. There's a lot of socialism for Elon Musk's mid-ass. Elon, leave it alone, man. Don't make no AI version of the Odyssey because it's already, you'll just reveal that this is really a white story in terms of values. There it is again, values. But look, the progress is already there for them. But this bomb class I found was just fascinating, the Black unaccountable machine. He said, it is a bait and switch operation. The Black unaccountable machine's leaders legitimately decry the oppression of the Black masses. Absolutely. But instead of doing something to alleviate that oppression, they endeavor mostly to enhance opportunities for the upper classes and liberal racists. That's a bitter pill to swallow. We see it going on now. There are two major political parties in this country when it comes to electoral politics. The White Nationalist Party has moved between them, beginning with Andrew Jackson, a nasty man who, if there is a hell, is in it. With the Democratic Party, that's where the White Nationalist Party seeded its delivery system early on, and then switching during and after the 1950s into the Republican Party. So the two major political parties, Republican and Democrat, are delivery systems for the acquisition of political power through the franchise. As Kwame Nkrumah said, seek ye first the political kingdom. If you can seize the levers of political power, you can then work on acquiring the levers of economic power and, shape agendas, and that kind of thing. That was at least his philosophy, which is why at the founding of the Organization of African Unity, and you all remember we talked about this Monday night as we did chapters 37 through chapters 40 of the Second Emancipation. Let me put a footnote here and say this Monday night we will finish our brother Howard French's book by looking at the coda and spending our 2 hours together, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern time here in the United States and globally as people join. For a point of reference, if you're not yet in Narrative and Nubia, and if you're in Nubia and you will join 1,000 plus, sometimes 2,000 who join us on Monday nights in this conversation, we will discuss this. But this is where Nkrumah, at the founding of the OAU in Addis Ababa in 1963, gave a talk in which he said, among other things, that one of the things I'm thinking about as we talk about the United States of Africa is how the United States of America was born in the 1780s by rejecting the loose confederation, those articles of confederation, and saying we must have a strong central federal government so we can deal with a common economic agenda, a common political agenda, even a common cultural agenda. But she didn't talk about slavery in that context, but that was one of the things that bound this country together and required a near countrywide suicide, which would have been okay, to the tune of over 700,000 people. Just having that conversation. Those of you who listened to Urban View, and if you didn't, I would encourage you to go back and look at that on the app. The conversation we had yesterday morning. This would be, if you're looking at this later, that would be Friday, July 24th, in the first block with Dr. David Blight, who was the past president of the Organization of American Historians, who was testifying here on Capitol Hill this week. As Bois and his crew are trying to take a jackhammer to the national parks and the Smithsonian's. They have in their targets the Museum of American History. They're after its director right now. In fact, they're putting up signs I saw in the paper this morning to say that at the Museum of American History, they're weaponizing history, and they got propaganda in there. I love it. I hope to slip down there in the next couple of days and take a picture of the sign. I love that. I love it. Tear it up, Bozo. Tear it up, Bo. Bo, tear it up, baby. Tear it up. You and Elon Musk. Paint it all white. But at any rate, in talking with Professor Blight yesterday, one of the things we talked about was his comments on the Civil War, both in his testimony before Congress and in the speech he gave, his outgoing speech as president of the Organization of American Historians, which was published in the Journal of American History last December. And when I quoted it, he was like, "Oh, now I'm really impressed. You read my article?" And I was like, "Dude, I'm academic like you, an academic. At least I play one sometimes." Historians' voices in times of peril. That's Blight's essay. What you think we do, man? He said, "Oh, no, I know." He said, "Okay, now as long as you know, you shouldn't be surprised. In fact, I take you down through there about some stuff that you haven't read, and we can have a different kind of conversation." But it was a great conversation. I want to say that, and thanks to Professor Blight for joining us yesterday morning. One of the things we talked about, and this is one of the points he made in his testimony before Congress. I forget whether it was in response to something asked by Representative Maxwell Frost, or maybe it was Representative Jonathan Jackson. I thought the exchange he had with Representative Ayanna Pressley was particularly poignant, but it might have been Frost, it might have been Jackson. Memory escapes me at the moment. But it was, no, I think it was Frost who asked about American exceptionalism. And Blight said, yeah, I'm someone who thinks that, yes, there's a lot exceptional about the United States. He says, here's something that's exceptional about the United States. Because the United States people, the propagandists like to say, we ended slavery, which means they want to go back to the Republican Party. So Tim Scott and Byron McDonald's, y'all should, before y'all keep repeating that the Republicans are the ones in the 1850s and 60s who led the abolition of slavery, just know that the white nationalists in the Democratic Party at the time all migrated to the Republican Party after the 1950s and 60s, largely over you two and everybody who looked like you infiltrating the Democratic Party in their minds. But at any rate, back to the point. Blight said, yeah, people like to talk about the United States of America ended enslavement, but what they don't talk about is the exceptional way that they did it. And he used the word empire, which I thought was interesting. He said, no country, no empire in the history of the world ever ended human captivity like the United States did. And the United States did it to the tune of 700,000 Americans. It was an attempt almost in mass suicide. 700,000 people murdered. And that's how you end slavery. He said, oh, yes, I would count that as exceptional. I'm like, Dr. Blight. Oh, now, Dr. Blight. But the point I'm trying to make here is that, this idea then, in terms of myth making and the need for myth making, and these hard white nationalists now pushing so hard on the question of myth making, which is why David Blight was on Capitol Hill this week, which was the conversation about Doge. It was the Doge committee, because they claim they closed Doge, but they really haven't. The purge, that nasty piece of work Russ Vought is continuing in his scurrying around in attics and basements of the federal government, looking for arcane rules to break or to use until they can't be used anymore, and then breaking and discarding them and going forward. Remember, in Project 2025, the 4 pillars, the last pillar was to replace everybody in the federal government with loyalists. It's almost as if we have amnesia. We don't have amnesia, because to have amnesia almost presumes that you had memory in the first place. We were born into a forced amnesia in many ways. But as they're doing this now, Congress having these hearings, say, bring blight up. And as he talked about the importance of museums, the importance of national parks, which he said collectively reach far more people than people in a lecture hall. And he and I had that conversation too near the end of our about 30 minutes together, which I thought was interesting because they introduced a class at Yale where they taught from the beginning to the end of the history of the United States of America as a country, he and 2 other colleagues. And he talked about how when they opened the class to the community, consistently they had to move to the largest venue on campus, the 800 plus seat chapel on Yale's campus, because that's how many people were showing up, because most of those people from the community. And then they posted YouTube videos, there are 37 of them between podcasts and the actual lectures that have attracted thousands of views. And as I was scrolling through and sampling some of the lectures, and thank you, my brother Kenyatta Adenia down in Georgia, who said, I thought I sent you that lecture, that conversation between Blight and Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, because there was a hack from the Heritage Foundation at the hearings too, who embarrassed himself sitting next to Professor Blight. But I said, no, Kenya, I don't think you did, because I would have stopped and watched that. And when Blight brought it up yesterday morning, when I talked about Kevin Roberts with that PhD that he has, remember we went through his dissertation in class during the period when we could have done something about these bozos. But hey, again, I don't mind reminding, because our work isn't to shy away from it, is to talk about it, that dissertation. And Blight was like, oh, I talked with him. We recorded one of the podcasts. I said, no, I'm embarrassed to say I missed that, and I'm going to watch it. And so it confirmed what he said yesterday morning, which was, we had a rule to be civil, but Roberts kept repeating talking points, ideological talking points. And as a scholar, he knows better than what he was saying coming out of his mouth. He got 1 or 2 examples, he cherry picked, and then he just ran his rant. And Blight was sitting there, as the academic he is, trying to respond with fact, but ultimately you're not talking about fact with these racists. They're not grounding what they're doing in fact. They're grounding it in myth making. So to try to dismantle what they're saying by pointing out the facts, you're missing the point. White facts, white nationalist facts, white supremacist minded facts are not about facts. They're about myth making. Think of it as the Odyssey almost. They're about myth making. The facts are irrelevant. What is needed is to use what we opened with, Prof, as you mentioned it, is categories. You're looking at archetypes. You're looking at points of entry to reinforce. You kind of wasting your breath, bro. But I said all that as a prelude to, encourage people to look at that conversation we had, because as he talked about this class they're offering at Yale, this one-time class they offered, which Yale supports as an institution. So they gave them, as he said they gave us resources. And I was sitting there listening, and I'm thinking to myself, yeah, we get resources too with Narrative and Nubia. That subscription fee allows us to have the platform. And as you heard, Professor Hunter would be called a bad businesswoman. We would be called bad business people, because the money goes to supporting the infrastructure, to expand it, to make it more accessible, to make it more workable. Yale subsidized the class that David Blight and them had, and it was hugely successful. 800 people attending the weekly lessons, and then thousands more online. But when you look at the numbers that they did, which they are rightfully proud of, and is shown as a paragon of how to use that model, they pale. They're a fraction of what we do every week here. And when you add that with Narrative and Nubia, every Monday night, not to mention, the weekends on Saturday and Sunday, not to mention Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, all of the days and active classes. The numbers of what they did in Yale, that one class, just on what we do in class with Carr, that's often double the numbers that they did on any given moment in terms of that real-time class. And then it just expands. I'm saying all that not as a quantitative assessment, not as a notion of analysis, but as something, and here's the point I'm making with this. the class that they did is a social structure rendering, trying to open up the narrative of the United States, which has a lot of myth making in it. And it was subsidized by a university, which is considered in the top tier, top echelon, where they call them the Ivy Leagues, and Yale and Harvard at the top of the Ivy Leagues, right? But what we're doing, we've jailed, broken all of that, black, white, and polka dot. And I encourage you all to go on Yale's website, look at any one of those sessions and compare it to any one of ours. And you be the decider as to which one is really shifting the way that we think about ourselves in the context of the world we live in, and which one invites all of us, not just the people talking here, all of us to do that rethinking. Because every time I get stopped on the street, it isn't by people who say, oh, wow, thank you for this, or, there's that. But there's also here's how I'm thinking about this. And it isn't the academics, just the academics. It's a lot of them too. It's just people on the street, people trying to go through the business of living and dying and making a way and preparing the next generation. And that is not only satisfying, that's encouragement to continue this work. And so all of that in the context of Black Odysseys, white facts. This is our Odyssey. This is our Odyssey. I call it Black Odysseys because that is the label that we have been given. And that is the context, the contour, the category, the point of entry that we use to get someplace else. It'll be beautiful one day to just drop black. Just like it would be beautiful one day to drop liberation, to drop freedom. We used to say, and we still say in Philadelphia Freedom Schools, our goal is to one day be able to drop the phrase freedom. We just call it school. So that it is so normed that it's no longer something that you come into thinking this is how I fight back. There's nothing to fight back against except your human potential. So, these hard white nationalists, such as those who have momentarily seized the federal government, they're pushing desperately to neuter political voting power in the United States of others, but they're risking an implosion of their existing structural advantage. You already got the greatest form of political affirmative action in the history of this criminal enterprise called the United States of America. It's called the Electoral College. It is so powerful that it outran even your wildest fever dreams, because when you made it up, you only had the Eastern Seaboard. You hadn't even gotten to the Mississippi. And then the Haitians beat Napoleon's ass, and you expanded, and then you put your eyes on all the way from sea, as you call it, from sea to shining sea. So you set up the Electoral College before you even realized how much of a structural advantage that is. And even with that, we still have the opportunity to break your political back. But, and they're pushing desperately to neuter political voting power of others with this SAVE Act and all this. Not going to survive the Senate. Doesn't mean you don't fight. Just know that, Bozo getting something through the House of Representatives this week with the MAGA Muppet, Mike Johnson, is not going to save them. As now that bill, through budget reconciliation, going to the Senate, thinking that they can sneak the Save America Act elements in, but they can't. The Senate parliamentarians going to tell them that this isn't part of budget reconciliation. This isn't about the budget, this piece of legislation, so you can't put it in. And John Thune, who knows what's coming, I'm sure he's been consulting with Mitch McConnell. I think at this point he may be using a Ouija board, but as he does, I'm sure McConnell is telling him from wherever he is, unless he's so deeply uncomfortable by the fire, he's telling him, made deeply uncomfortable by the fire, he's telling him, hey man, don't push this any further, because the backlash to our white nationalist thrust is reaching the point where it might dissolve. So if they keep pushing this, not just the voting rights stuff, but even the notion of neutering the museums, neutering the national parks, this just attracts more people to the space. But as they're pushing to desperately neuter the potential voting powers of others, they are risking an implosion of their existing structural advantage by attacking carefully curated national myths that hold the polity together, at least tangentially, that hold the polity together. What holds the United States of America together? When people say the American people, whether it be Stephen Miller or the ancestor Elijah Cummings, when people say we, an American people, language that I used tactically and strategically in my conversation with David Blight, Same thing with Ken Burns. When we talk with Ken Burns, the idea is that that's held together by a fragile set of myths and the potential for living together that those myths could represent from one political lens, but also the myth that none of the rest of you are heir to it, that come from another set of lenses on the common political myth. So I'm saying all that in the context of this moment, and here's where we'll get into, when apply our conceptual categories and continue this conversation. Meanwhile, and people can say, well, why would you go to see the Odyssey? I go because y'all went. And I understand as a teacher that the best thing, and I learned this, I knew this, I experienced it as a student, and it crystallized for me in the language of the great John Henry Clark, who would also, not only bless and condone, but instruct to do the same thing. If the people are looking at this, you should know enough about it to use it as what I would now call, again, borrowing language from the great Haile Gerima, point of entry. It's a point of entry. So yeah, I sat in the dark for 3 hours at the IMAX up in Silver Spring, and watched it at the old AFI movie house in the dark with a bunch of people who were just fangirling and fanboying about it, and stayed afterward to have long conversations about the technology of 70 millimeter. It was the same theater where I watched another film that riffed on elements that we see in Christopher Nolan's work, Sinners. Oh, by the way, I think that cat Ludwig Göransson scored them both. In fact, Ludwig Göransson, the guy who did the movie, the Odyssey soundtrack, who also did Tenet, shout out to John David Washington, who also did Oppenheimer for Christopher Nolan, and who, after meeting his friend Ryan Coogler in 2007 while they were in school, has scored every one of Ryan Coogler's movies, beginning with Fruitvale Station. Same guy who did the music in Sinners did the music in the Odyssey, which of course we know, and we'll come back to that because music is a through line in all of this, and that those metaphors of the water, we talked extensively about Sinners like everybody else, except that I like to think we had at least as much study behind our discussion as anybody who turned on the camera and started talking. It's gotten to the point now where if I turn on something online, and I see mouths moving, which is everything online, I just kind of begin to think, no, how am I going to parse through this? Because now I've almost gotten to the point where it's blurring and it's just people talking. And I'm thinking, I'm one of those people, my mouth moving too. But I like to think that at least as my mouth moves, it's informed by a little bit more study than most, and as much study as anybody else out there. But Nolan's film dropped, The Odyssey. It's making hundreds of, I'm sure it's soared past 300 million now, because it's the 260s when I was looking a couple of days ago. But people are hungry for cultural meaning making, what we would call our cultural meaning making category in our Africana studies framework. But they're hungry for it, the kind of cultural meaning making that feeds these seemingly archetypical myths, these universal truths, as people might call them. But are they universal truths? Or is it myth making based on white facts? A lot of it is, but I think all human beings engage in cultural meaning making, the use of icons, the focus on shrines, places where you can come together and imagine you have a collective experience, whether it be fireworks on the 4th of July or watch service on the last day of the year in church, whether it be going to mosques for Juma, or whether it be convening for homecoming on the Upper Quadrangle at Howard, or the greatest homecoming on earth, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical University, whether it be a ritual of a baptism for a child in the family, or a funeral ritual where you all convene the family to send someone in a celebration of life into the ancestral realm. These are rituals which require convening at shrines. So you've got icons, figures of uncritical praise, whether it be Jesse Jackson or Odysseys, whether it be Barack Obama or Ulysses, whether it be Harriet Tubman or Kamala Harris, whether it be Miriam Makeba or Celia Cruz, whether it be Muhammad Ali or Nelson Mandela and Winnie Mandela. Icons, figures that go beyond their lives, the facts of their lives, to elevate into a form of myth, whether it be the Osage folk, Kwame Nkrumah, who understood, following after Europeans, that after he became prime minister and then they moved to a republic shortly thereafter and he became president, it's important to take the faces of the Queen of England and all them other Europeans off the money. But modeling the Europeans who understand the question of icons and national identity. Then they say, well, it's important maybe not to replace them as they did in South Africa 2 generations later with the big 5, with rhinos, elephants, and stuff like that. No, we should replace them, or Reebok, Springboks, right? Not Reebok, Springboks. We should replace the queen with me. Bro, what you doing? I'm putting my face on the money, baby. And y'all see Kwame Nkrumah here. Look at that. This the one city coin shortly after he took power. Civitas Ghanaias Conditor, Kwame Nkrumah, the Asage folk. There on the back, of course, is the Black Star rendered. This is from 1958 Ghana, 1 penny. Then they go to the CD, right? But my point is this. It's all about icons. It's cultural meaning making. It's the kind of cultural meaning making I'd show y'all Marcus Garvey too, but I think I moved the coin. Anyway, even as Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, hasn't been able to get a $250 bill with has been able to get a $250 bill made with Donald Trump's face. But because you can have celebratory coins, is actually striking some coins for the 250th birthday of America with Donald Trump president's face. So there's going to be some of those too you can get if you want to collect them. I doubt I'll get one, because it's certainly not currency you can use, but I'll be damned. It's supposed to be ceremonial. But the point is this: putting your face on the money is a form of iconization. You're creating icons, and it goes along with shrines. It goes along with rituals. And in this case, a coin is like a totem. It's a portable shrine. You carry it around like a lapel pin and a flag, but all those things hold the polity together. And what these white nationalists are doing in the United States of America by going after the museums, by going after the national parks, the little slick back hair, product heavy laden Secretary of the Interior, Doug Burnham, looking like some kind of bizarro form of Matthew McConaughey Burgum running around the country, is what he's doing and what they're doing, even as he's the one tasked with putting up signs outside the Museum of American History today that say that careful, because what's in there is propaganda. Hilarious. What he is doing is taking the orders from white nationalists who think somehow that by attempting to curate, narrate, shrink the stories that are told in there, that are told in those spaces that reach many more people than David Blight and his colleagues at this class they had at Yale. And I would say many more people than us, except I think in terms of African people, at least, we are on par or exceed. I'm sure we exceed, because I spent a lot of time at those places around the country, certainly here in the district, the number of people of African descent who go in those places. In doing this, you are threatening to lose your existing structural advantage by attacking these carefully curated national myths, because the people curating those myths are trying to hold together a U.S. polity, an American polity, to offend everybody else in the hemisphere. And in doing this, they are attacking it. So meanwhile, as I said, the Odyssey came out. People hungry for myths. They love myths because myths hold people together. That's why people go to museums. That's why people go to the national parks, not only to learn and to get some facts, but also to feel a sense of collective belonging and to try to figure out how can we live together. But contrasting these cherished Western archetypes, like the Homeric myth, with intra-racial satirizations. In other words, these are contested narratives. So, the Homeric myth is pretty homogenous. It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't matter who you cast in the roles if you haven't changed the story underneath. It was great to see Lupita Nyong'o. It was Nyong'o. It was particularly nice to see her in conversation and in images as they went past. Beautiful gowns with all the others. You see Travis Scott stumbling around, stamping his stick on the ground. Okay, that's cool. It was cool to see Zendaya, as a mute Athena, which is just like offensive to even the concept of the Athena the Greeks had, much less where she came from, her mother. We'll talk about that in a minute. But hey, it's great to see them there. Right, to see a few Negro soldiers walking around behind Matt Damon, for whom the soldier is his role, whether he be a spy for the CIA. Remember his role in that? Whether it be a spy crossing the bridge with other people, or whether it be a army man in Oppenheimer, whether it be Private Ryan who must be saved. I mean, the soldier is consistent with him. Interestingly enough, his debut role with the late Robin Williams out of Good Will Hunting, it's like this kind of self-searching angst which he carries through. You're saying, okay, this is the U.S. version of the Canadian Tom Hanks. I mean, every generation must produce it in Hollywood, the myth-making capital for a time of the world. Shout out to Bollywood and Nollywood, which will pass them in the fast lane, not to mention the Chinese film market. Again, I would love to see how this would be received other places, although the Europeanization of much of the world is something we continue to fight. So I imagine there will be a lot of cheers there too. But again, beautiful gowns. Beautiful gowns. The Odyssey that Christopher Nolan made, to me, as I came out, I thought, well, my favorite telling of this story is Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And we'll come back to that in a second as well. But these elder narratives, the narratives that predate them both, here's one. In fact, I would say if you go to see the Odyssey, or if you haven't seen it yet and you're planning on seeing it on the bootleg in particular, then check out Sanhat or Sinhue, or the Tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor. This is a tale from ancient Egypt we've talked about before. I'm holding up the version that was put together by the Shimsubak. The Shimsubak, the collective, here again with Aikwe Arma leading them. This is the crew that translated this from the Medu Neter, and you see the translators who did it into Akan, English, French, Kikongo, Kiswahili, Portuguese, who did the transliteration. Our brother, Yoporeka Somé, who will be with us in Kemet, in Wolof and Zulu. Yoporeka Somé did the transliteration, the move from ancient Egyptian to the well, he did it from Medu Neter, from the writing, into the language, in terms of the language markers that were then translated into other languages. This is one of Yoporeka Somé's books, King Khufu and His Magicians, which he also did the translations for into several other languages. And you see here, so when you see the hieroglyphs, this is Yoporeka's work, you see translates from the Medu Neter, and then underneath you see those letters, that's the transliteral. So now he's translated into sounds that will then be converted into the other languages. This is King Khufu and His Magicians. And he also did it in this edition, English and French. So Yoporeka did the transliterations, which then the other folks at the Shimsubak used to translate into the other languages. So this story, you see the hieroglyphs here. This is for all the people who talk about the lack of rigor for the Afrocentrists. I tell you how to go to hell, but you're already there. So I would then encourage you to follow the instruction of the great George Clinton, whose birthday was this week, 80 years old. Free your mind and your ass will follow. So here you go. This is the standard right here, the rigor. You do the Medu Neter, then you do the transliteration here in the top line, and then you start translating it into Wolof and French, into Yoruba and Zulu, into English and Portuguese, all of these. But this story collectively is 1,000 years older than the story attributed to the collective of praise singers, jollies, poets, griots, who collectively are referred to as Homer. No evidence that there was ever a single person named Homer. But in the West, you got to have one author, right? So the point is this. 1,000 years older than the Odyssey, but the story in there is a story they take a stab at in the Odyssey. But because we don't know about that one, the one I just showed you, the African one, probably maybe Middle Kingdom Kemet, 11th, 12th dynasty, used as a school book, used for many other things. And I won't even hazard to say anything else, because the finest person of our generation, of my generation, to take a stab at joining the Shimsubak, who, along with Yoporeka, will be with us in the Nile Valley leading that conversation, is Mario Beatty. So, here in this public space, encouraging folk to go look at Dr. Beatty's extensive archive of language instruction and discussion of language, not only in classical Africa, but globally, bringing it up to date in the Nubia database. His classes on Middle Egyptian, where you can learn the hieroglyphs from beginning to end. His class is now on Coptic. He has added that language, a bridge between ancient Egypt and now. and his discussion on subject matter and topics, historical, biographical, conceptual, including the shipwrecked sailor. I suspect after the Odyssey, if he chooses to go sit in the dark and watch it, he'll do a whole comparison of the Odyssey and the story of someone who is in exile trying to return home that predates the Odyssey by 1,000 years, one that Africans created, you know. But shout out to Christopher Nolan, beautiful gowns, beautiful gowns. So, but as we think about this, in a moment when this white nationalist in the U.S. federal government is working over time to destroy all lines between fact and myth, because see, that's their other agenda. As I said, they don't care about facts. It looks like they're fighting over facts. Dr. Blight, as a trained historian, is saying, we welcome to fight, we're going to fight back. Yeah, bro, but you got to understand, they're not fighting about facts. They're fighting about myth. They don't care about facts. So when you say, when is the war going to be over? Their response is not, well, we got a timetable, we're working on negotiation. Their response is, it's over. It's already over. Somewhere George Orwell is like, how many more times I got to tell y'all? Even Raoul Peck, our brother, the Haitian filmmaker, making the movie on George Orwell, his latest film, which we talked about here. He's like, man, how many more times this guy got to tell y'all? This is not about fact. It's about myth. So whatever they say, completely like, listen, man, you're breaking the law. You know what the response is? No, we're not. We're following the law. It's like the response of a child. You broke that dish. I did not break that dish. Well, how did the dish break? It fell. You dropped it. Yeah, oh no, it fell. Well, how did it fall? I don't know. It fell. But Trump speak, white nationalists speak now. You broke the dish. The dish is not broken. I'm looking at the dish. What dish? That's a dish. That's not a dish. That's the radical left Democrats, the communists. That's Mamdani and Obama. It's a dish. And then people say, I'm gonna show you. Watch. This says dish. These are the pieces. They've moved on to the next conversation with the rest of them people that say, I don't know why they call that a dish. It's clearly the radical left Democrats. They're not fighting over facts. And what they are working hard at now is to erase any notion of a distinction between fact and myth. That's what the attacks on the universities are about. That's what the attacks on the museums are about. That's what the attacks on the national parks are about. But what are we about? We're not about ignoring them. We have to acknowledge the social structure we're in, but we're about completely recentering ourselves in the thing we have always done, which is never allow that kind of thinking to be at the head of our thinking. Maybe there's a class, as Tony Brown who would say that because they're trying to figure out some way to negotiate and to navigate. And I understand that, but here's where the value of collective learning and developing our abilities is more critical than ever. Collective learning, not learning for a small segment of our group, not learning for a small segment of our community who will then say, we acquired this learning to serve everyone. No, we're all acquiring learning and we will serve each other. And if there's specialized learning that needs to be done, you absolutely do that, but you do it in the context of all of us learning. Shout out last night to the 10th cohort of the Bison STEM scholars, the Carr scholars as they are called, and to the 4th cohort of the social science and humanities students who now are all on full scholarship at Howard University, over 60 of them collectively, and to their families, their parents, their siblings, community members who gathered yesterday for several hours at the Howard University Student Center for dinner and celebration and convening there on their way in a couple of days to South Africa to spend nearly 2 weeks there in study and community. And to my friend, Dr. Ronald Smith and his entire staff, Ron and I standing together outside the Student Center 10 years ago. He said, Carr, did you pull together a class? And I said, sure. So I called my friends, R.L. Valethia, Beatty and Watkins. So let's come together. We invited another one of our faculty members, Josh Myers, in, and we team teach that class. And last night I went to, as I always go, and as I sat there, one of my former students, one of the first in the first group of graduates at Howard University, when I came to the university, as I told the provost, Tony Wheator, last night, I said, man, Aziza and them broke me in. Aziza Hines, whose father has an incredible history book I showed y'all before. I was looking for it this morning. I think I moved it over somewhere else, out of Texas, out of Houston, who was in that early, one of those early graduating classes at Howard, 2005, maybe 4 or 5, or was it 5 or 6? Anyway, and she has 6 children, 3 of whom have either graduated from Howard already and taken classes with me, or her the next one in line just is now, it was in this class that we taught this summer. Also a product of the great Nelva Williamson in Houston, one of the first cohort of teachers of the AP African American Studies course, a master teacher in Houston. And Aziza was telling us the story of how they connected with Miss Nelva. And I want to just shout her out as well, because the first day of class, and I see your baby girl told me that the first day of class, what she didn't say was you were her mom. And I said, I just didn't see, those are the kind of folk who Tony Brown might say are in that talented 10th and that he's part of too, but they also maroons. They're in that 4th category he talked about, but they're also in a structure, a university structure that has its limits, which is why it had to be jailbroken. Because the limits then say, while these 60 are getting full ride scholarships through the effort of their academic preparation, by the way, that isn't available to everyone in this society, isn't available to most people in this society, and that these white nationalists are trying to restrict to even more, even as their own stupid children who can't do nothing but fail forward in a white supremacist society where the power is going to be conveyed to them in an intergenerational transfer that we could disrupt if we decided we wanted to get off our asses and do something about it. But that these young people, it's 60 of them, and they don't have to pay $64,000 a year tuition, room, and board to go to Howard University. Or a third of that at one of the HBCUs in the South, public schools like the one I went to, who are under perpetual assault from the hillbilly horde. They don't have to do that. So they've been relieved of that. And many of you all saw the story this week, as I said, that Howard University went through a moment there, roiling, where many students were disenrolled before they ever set foot on campus, incoming students, many of them who did not set up payment plans, and because they were told through email and through phone exchange that the scholarship money that they had been able to manage to cobble together, the GI Bill money that they were able to bring to present, that wouldn't hit accounts until the end of the summer, maybe even as late as September, would be accounted for and was being factored in so that they did not have a need to set up a payment plan. And then something went wrong with the algorithm, or something went wrong with a drop ball here or there. And, to the tune of hundreds of them, they were purged. Not even purged, they were disenrolled. Purging involves another maneuver, but they were disenrolled. So, we saw the debacle. We saw the students crying on TikTok and Instagram. We saw them making the videos. We saw the outrage that came, and we saw very quickly a response by Howard. And first through a letter to everybody, not everybody, I didn't get it. Somebody had sent it to me, and then a letter to the whole university community. And then ultimately the corrective began to manifest. Okay, well, let's go back and look. Okay, no, you've been reinstated. No, you've been reinstated. Okay, no, you've been reinstated. Okay, see, that's how you do it. If it was 2 people, if it was 20 people, if it was 50 people, it'd been like, okay, maybe the students didn't read the emails where they say you got to set up a payment plan. What, 500? Nah, this is a structural fix, and Howard is fixing it. And Howard is not an outlier. This happens a lot of places, and it ain't just HBCUs, by the way. People saying, see, that's why I went to a white school. You've opened your mouth. Your brain is on display, and you should be ashamed and embarrassed. But I know you're not, because you don't know enough to talk about it. And that's an easy cure for ignorance. It's called study, and it's best done collectively, which brings me back to the point I'm making. With this assault, we're not going to get out of it by 60 students here, or 100 families here, or a talented 10th, or a guiding 100th. It's going to come through collective work, collective learning, and developing our abilities as individuals in a collective. That's what David Blight is talking about when he says the national parks and the museums and the Smithsonians and all those museums and the affiliates. Those are the small museums, like the Harriet Tubman Museum in Cambridge, Maryland. Shout out to everyone who has donated. Let's keep it up, because the break-in there that interrupted their work, now they have collected, I guess, over $70,000 now in small donations, so they'll be able to be up and running very quickly. Thank you, Sister Harris, and all the people who manage that museum, all volunteers. But let's give them an embarrassment of riches. Because ultimately, if everybody does a little, nobody has to do a lot. There are thousands of us. We average somewhere between 20, 25,000 a week here in terms of unique views at in class in this space. And I'm only bringing that number up to say that sometimes it's a lot more. The point is that there are enough people in here, people put in $1 or $2. This is how the Black Star Network works. With Roland Martin, this is absolutely how narrative works in Nubia. Karen Hunter, this is how the process works. We crowdsource it. Nobody has to do a lot. And the subsequent work, whether it be the work that we heard from the elders there in Georgia, building out into a library and work, whether we see the work of Aya Anelli out in Nigeria with the Emma Johnson library there in Popo town. This is how you build. You do it collectively. And as these people are fighting, we don't have to rely on the HBCUs that Tony Brown was talking about in the 1980s as they created Black College Day here in Washington, D.C. And what we saw was a clip from those early conversations about the importance of Black colleges. We need those schools. We will not surrender those schools. We will fight with and for those schools. But on the way last night to the ritual on campus where these families were gathered, I was late to the ritual because I was in conversation with a family who was doing a campus tour. Shout out to them. I'm gonna leave y'all alone. I ain't gonna put the names in it because I didn't ask you whether I could or not. But who are faithful discussants, whose son is at Howard right now, doing some important work, about to leave and go overseas to the continent to continue that work. An academic, first top ranked Trey, an academic. I guess Trey, I did say, who's I want you to meet my father. He in here right now. We talking right now. I see you, Baba. We had a great conversation. He said, I want you to meet my wife. Here goes my wife. Here's our daughter. Here's our niece. We having a conversation. And his wife was like, oh yeah, man, we listen to y'all all the time. He said, I'm finally glad to meet you. I said, yeah, but we were just sitting there tearing it up, having a great conversation. My point is, that's a jailbroken university on the way to a ritual where some representatives from the jailbreak are going to be able to acquire an education that Tony Brown would say will put you in this elite class. But then you got to make a choice, young people. Are those skills going to be the kind of skills you develop and then turn around to the great unwashed masses of our people as it will be curated and you'll be talked and led to think about them and say, I'm going to be of service to you by saying you can be like me? No, you're leading them in the wrong direction. I have all the faith in the world that that won't happen, but I don't have to rely on that faith because we have bypassed all of it. We are now together in this work. And so thinking about jailbreaking in this collective moment and this institution building within African and other spaces, we ask what Du Bois asked in 1960 at Johnson C. Smith University, whither now and why? As these laws change, as these rules change, and you are now integrated. Not completely as a human, as Sterling Brown said, I'm going to come in as a full number, a whole number, an integer. No, we're going to bring you in a way that if you can shape yourself to what's going on here, we might be convinced to vote for you a little bit. We might, but what we're never going to do is give up our national myth. You can integrate yourself into ours, but we're not going to concede them. So I'm going to talk about that in this context now. Talked about this question of Black electability. This works. We make, this idea that Africans in the United States must conform in our Black Odyssey in this country, integrate or otherwise neuter all or part of ourselves culturally, politically, perhaps as an alloy of both cultural and political. The days of Jesse Jackson being unapologetically African and integrated politically in a moment of cultural meaning making, reflecting these shifts or positions in social structure in his life and times, those days have passed. Think about this. Because if you integrate enough culturally, you put your culture in, it gets absorbed into a social structure that would then use you to be, I don't know, let's use a phrase that may have had some origins in Sterling Brown and his early work in the early 20th century and then morphs into another thing in the 1960s with the Black Arts Movement. Yeah, let's call it a magical Negro. Do you want to be the Bagger Vance of American politics? In other words, come save us, Magic Negro. Hope. Change. Save us, Magical Negro. And then when the Magical Negro don't save you, that nigga the same as, okay, yikes. Because when you put a little swag in it, put a little tan suit in it, walk them in, they then expect you to be a Magical Negro instead of what? A politician. And Jesse didn't start that, but he's certainly up the level of it with incredible oratory. But it's only incredible in the context of a social structure, because if you follow Jesse Jackson to a pulpit anywhere in our governance formation, in our ways of knowing, he becomes yet one of inestimable number of women and men who can preach just as or better. I prefer to hear Jeremiah Wright. If Jeremiah Wright ran for president and brought all that swag and all that intellect and all that style and all that singing ability and all that conceptual convening into a space, I'm voting for that dude over Jesse Jackson. But it wasn't his testimony. Like Martin Luther King said, I'm a preacher. I'm a minister. I'm a man of this way of knowing, not running for office. Jesse merged that together. And Obama, who, if you put him in the pulpit, would be the last junior preacher on a 15 preacher revival night, and would give a few words. People say, okay, that was all right, young man. You keep working on that. I'm not trying to diss him. I'm saying in a governance formation, it's a very different rendering. But when you put that kind of cultural sensibility in a social structure thing, we become magical Negroes. Barbara Jordan, magical Negro. You've never seen a Negro. Speak some more about the Constitution. We love it. Anita Hill. Y'all wasn't checking for black women, but when she checked that damn Mr. Talk about pornos on the job, supposed to be doing your job at EEOC Clarence Thomas, then you become an icon, a magical Negro for all women. As if you treat black women any better or any worse. No. A magical Negro speaks for us. And so, and then to be attacked by pieces of men like Lindsey Graham, who can't attack anybody anymore on this side, and who can't attack anybody from the ancestral realm. I'm willing to step out on that, because if you come for me, little Lynn, I suspect that my ancestors will show you something else on the other side, if you're even close enough to them for them to have to do that. My point is that magical Negroes are the result of integrating a little cultural meaning making, a little ways of knowing, a little taste of movement and memory into a social structure that sees us as magic when we can conform some way as an alloy coming into this. That's what integration means in this society. So those days, because their politics are racial, you can't separate a white nationalist social structure from the way that social structure integrates us. We have to ask ourselves in this Black Odyssey where we have been forced into, what is our journey? I'm not going to talk about a hero's journey, but what is our journey collectively, so that we don't get caught in this other trap? A word to the nativists, the Black nativists, to my friends, to my family, to those who are, still thinking about Black nativism in the United States and clinging to the myth making of the US as some form of shield against harm, and using that as a shield against other Africans from other places. We saw, as I said, what happened in this recent election cycle. More and more people who are of African descent, but whose families didn't go through captivity here in the United States, are being elected to political office. And, it's important to understand that the voter suppression gives it away. They don't care what color, where you came from. You are all Black to them. If they were supporting robust political participation, they would be testing the proposition that white nationalism is still a compelling political message. But white nationalism is increasingly not something that is gaining, it's not gaining millions of people. It's losing people. It's not a compelling political message. But there's a caveat there. When you see someone of African descent who is pushing for things that will benefit everyone, including African people, don't cut our noses off to spite our face. As Haile Greenman says, you got African people who white people might be more open to voting for because they didn't go through the captivity. Like Quiros in Colorado, maybe that's the case, because they're not a what he calls reminder Black. So Haile's label, Haile's concept, Haile's category for Africans who whose ancestors went through captivity here in the United States, what they would call the descendants of slaves or all that stuff. He would say those are reminder Blacks. So they evoke in people who have their racism still bubbling, I don't want to be reminded. So I will vote for the one whose parents came from Ethiopia. I'll vote for the one whose people came from Somalia, another very white district that Ilhan Omar represents. And, he said, well, I'm not racist. Yeah, but you voted for them. Was part of it because they're not a reminder Black? That they're come from other places Black? We can't fall into that same trap. Actually, we can, but we shouldn't. Will there be a congressional Black caucus as these things change, as gerrymandering continues, at least in the foreseeable future, in the immediate future? Yes, there will be. Will the numbers diminish? Probably, maybe only slightly. But the question of culture is something that we have to continue to address. So, and that's important. It's kind of, in fact, it's more than kind of, it's actually the logic that Marcus Garvey used, when he talked about the question of, what did he talk about? The question of, he said, as Palestine is to the Jew, so Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. And in that process of saying that, you can look back at the 1920s and say, well, why would he compare Black people to Jews or the children of Israel? Let me make that distinction. To the children of Israel, politically expressed as Judaism or Zionism in the 1920s, as they are trying to ultimately negotiate for and capture, with the help of these Western powers, particularly Great Britain, particularly, let me put this up here. I was looking for this book and it was down between my legs and I have it here. The question of Palestine during the 1920s becomes the state of Israel in the 1940s, which is now a genocidal space. And if you say it's not a genocidal space, talk to those people who are breaking international law and local law in Israel by going out with shotguns and killing other human beings who are Palestinian, and even going so far as to interrupt people with the help of the Israeli police, like Ro Khanna, who comes from the United States of America, where all that damn money is coming from, that bought them damn guns. You detained them for a couple of weeks ago. All that's going on. But if you go to the 1920s, they're saying, let's look at what they would call the Jews, whatever that means, Dave Chappelle would say. But the whole idea is it's a proxy for cultural coherence. It's a proxy for saying that in this political structure, in this social structure, if we cohere culturally, we can use that as a foundation to then intervene politically. There's a range of opinions in communities of those who are part of the Jewish faith, who don't commingle as easily the question of ethnicity with the question of religion. But in that process, you have African people who are attempting to sustain some sense of cultural cohesion, to use it as a springboard to intervene in social structures, who say, there's a model over there. It's very interesting to consider that strain, and a lot has been written on it, a lot has been discussed about it. But before we close today, I want to think about this in the larger context of our theme, Black Odysseys, White Facts, because in this moment where social structure is fighting furiously over the question of how do we cohere, what brings us together as polities, as countries, as empires, there are many different types of people inside those borders, inside those empires, who, using myth making as a common point of entry, are trying to figure out how to survive individually and collectively. So let's look at it using our conceptual categories. That's what we've been doing, but as I kind of begin to tie things together before we get out of here today, I want to make it crystal clear. And this use of these categories is because, at its best, what categories do, these conceptual categories being an example, is to give order, to help us keep large amounts of information neat enough to think, to begin to think, because thinking is messy. Every week, every day, people will say, I get this a lot in student evaluations, Dr. Carr is all over the place. My answer is, I absolutely am. My answer is also, do you know enough to see the common beat in all of it? The answer to that would be, for someone who says I'm all over the place and stops right there, the answer is no. But that's okay. It's absolutely okay. Conversation, pushing back, discussing back and forth. That's what I'm trying to spark. But there's also a strict categorization going on. And those categories are very clear, even as they are flexible enough to interact with. What categories allow for is a form of keeping large amounts of information in enough order to begin to think with them, to think against them, to move beyond them. But the point of entry is clear. That's what a category does. Also, it gives you the ability to do that with a form of speed, to make it at least easy enough to begin to search for what we need. This is the illusion that social media creates. I looked at a TikTok video for 30 seconds and now I know. You don't know nothing. That was a point of entry, and if badly done, it took you away from the facts, not toward the fact. Your Black Odyssey is now dissipated into imaginary places like Wakanda, or your Black Odyssey is now taken over into a place where you're literally reinforcing your own oppression. All that categories can work all kind of ways. They become neutral in a way. And then finally, it allows you to show how things are similar or different from each other. Social structures, we all live in them. Governance, who we are to each other, is much more intimate. Last night, listening to the students who spoke, and shout out to all the students who gave remarks on behalf of all the other students who sang and performed. Just brilliant work, all of y'all. Love y'all. Love you. There were references to, our class, because I gave the students the essays I wrote, which are now the foundation for the larger written work. Those 6 conceptual categories, each of them written in 2 to 4 page summaries to give them a point of departure. And in class, we talked and worked through those categories. And then everybody gave examples of how those categories apply to their own work. And I want to thank these 18-year-olds, both the sciences students, the social sciences and humanities students, and the morning class of student athletes, where I gave them the exact same work. I want to thank all of you, because in pushing me to think about it, it really did help and inform how I think about those conceptual categories, which improves everything everywhere. And will improve our 3rd iteration of the Introduction to Africana Studies class, which I imagine we will take up this fall. I'm beginning to think about that, although everyone here, I want to say again, because repetition is key, that I think the next thing we'll do, which will be open to everybody, including all these folks on YouTube and everything, is a mini class on the Black university. I think it's necessary. I think it's important. And I think that before we go much further, I want to talk about that in a very concrete and specific context. So that when we talk about jailbreaking the Black university, I've made the assumption far too often that we know what the university is and what the Black university is. And so we're going to talk about, so again, shout out to those students. So these conceptual categories are a form of categories, and categories help us with, order, speed, with rhythm. Let's go through them very quickly on this topic of Black Odysseys, white facts. The social structure, as I said, there's a fight now going on over memory. That's what Professor Blight and others were doing when they testified before Congress today. The Smithsonian is fighting. Lonnie Bunch fighting with dear life, the director of the Smithsonian, protecting the current director of the National Museum of American History. We went down to the Smithsonian Castle. It will close tomorrow on the 26th. There's an exhibit there called American Aspirations, Our Shared Future, 250 years. And I think I took it in the other room. The catalog I showed you all, the exhibition catalog that they've been working on for a decade, y'all. That when Bois came into office, they took a wrecking ball to the entire thing the Smithsonian had planned. We were talking down there at the castle the other day with some retired curators, with people who work in the staff. And by the way, if you want to see the inside of the Smithsonian Castle, you probably need to go down there today or tomorrow, because they're going to close it again. They only opened it for this little exhibit they have. And it's a small exhibit, fewer than 24 objects. Thomas Jefferson's writing desk, the treaty between George Washington and the indigenous people from 1794, Harriet Tubman's hymnal, AME Church hymnal. Shout out to my man, Charles Blockson, just talked with his daughter, Noelle Parker Blockson, who, of course, received all of those pieces from Harriet Tubman from her family, and then in turn gave them by hand to Lonnie Bunch when he was director of the National Museum of African American History. So those things are there, along with some other things. A light bulb from Thomas Edison's Menlo Park laboratory. Shout out to Lewis Latimer, who made that light bulb continue to stay on more than a few seconds or minutes. There are many other things. The big Men of Color to Arms poster that was generated with the names of Octavius Catto and Fred Douglass and others as they recruited Black men to join the Union Army and end their captivity. So they have that poster there. So these objects that were put together are a tiny sliver of what they had planned at the Smithsonian before Bois, the killer of culture in the United States of America, and his people got in. So they shrunk it. It's in one room in the Smithsonian Castle. But that's part of this social structure fight. They're fighting. Elon Musk on the AI Odyssey he wants to create. It's a form of cultural warfare in the social structure, and they don't want us being pictured in the Odyssey. My response to that would be fine. Although I do love what Coleman Domingo said. I laughed out loud when I read it, when he said, wait a minute, an AI Odyssey from Elon Musk would be like Christmas at Cracker Barrel. That would be funny, except, Coleman Domingo from Philly, although he's traveled all around where he know. He know this. When you go to Christmas Day and Cracker Barrel, if it's open in the South, you're gonna see a lot of black people, most of them working. But anyway, so I mean, I don't know, but I get your point, bro. And then he went on to say, it's a myth. Myths don't have any color. I say, yeah, myths often have color, brother. But again, my favorite version of the Odyssey is, oh brother, where art thou? Which we'll talk about in a moment. In governance, in this governance formation, you know, this moment of momentary crisis at Howard, which is a proxy for a lot of different other places. This isn't just about, in terms of who we are to each other, it's about what is the purpose of college? What is the meaning of college in a moment when it is fraught with difference? You read the Chronicle of Higher Education, you read or listen to any academics, many academics right now, everybody nervous. The law professors are definitely nervous. Why? Because AI could wipe out the concept of legal practice as we think about it. The same thing is going to happen across the board. So what does it mean to even go to college? What does it mean to pay to go to a place where your major investment of time and effort isn't now just study and hasn't been for quite some time, but it's association with each other? That's the living thing you can't get online or on screen. And that's important. What is the meaning of college? What's the meaning of HBCU education, which relies very heavily on that thing I just said, life to life. When I stood in that room last night for hours, we stood there and having conversation with the parents and the families of these young people. My God, I will vibrate. I always vibrate on that because, you know, standing with a brother, you know, went to Fisk and then Tulane Law School. We started talking, and the dean, the black man at Tulane, he was collecting HBCU graduates like nothing and bringing them into that space, was the same dean that tried to convince me to go to Tulane, but I went to Ohio State instead. My friend, my sister, Deborah Hurd, went to Tulane, and she came in and graduated a couple of years before he did. And I'm standing here, his son standing there, we swapping stories, we alphas, we talking about Alpha Chi. Shout out to them at Fisk University, where the national president of Alpha was also the president of Fisk, Henry Ponder, when he was there. And I was down the street at Tennessee State. But that's a 10th conversation, even though I'm the first in my family to go to college. But what your class position does not have to define your commitment to the people. What defines your commitment to the people is an action. And for that story, I got dozens more just in conversations, Africans globally convening in that space because their children are taking that next step. What is the meaning of an HBCU education? That is really at the heart of it, as Dr. Smith said last night. But then capacity of HBCUs, capacities of University General is the next question. Infrastructure, institutional memory. People say, well, what happened to all that money Mackenzie Scott gave Howard? How come you can't use that to retire the debt? That was a lot of money, and that wasn't any much money. And you don't know what other holes are plugged there. Is the hospital, you got to worry about the operational budget. You know, is Howard too big? Is Howard not big enough? All these conversations people trying to work out. But what holds it all together is a commitment to our common and collective work. This is Tony Brown's critique. If you Negroes gonna get to the point where it's like us and these 5 other Negroes who can write the check and the rest of y'all go to hell, then you are an enemy of our people, my friend. And that requires us not beating you up, but creating spaces that render your lack of service irrelevant. Because you do not get to define our Black institutions through your individual selfish choices. Conversely, the community must come together. When I see the alumni at Claflin, when I see the alumni chapter of Howard University in Atlanta, as I've said many times here, I love those folks because they raise money. They raise money to retire the debt of these young people. My friend Karen Shropshire, who's now the incoming president of the Howard University National Alumni Association, comes out of Atlanta with all of that work. Well, comes out of New York, but then, you know, been in Atlanta now for years. They raise money, but it's the same thing at Tennessee State and Grambling. It's the same thing at wherever you put your HBCU in. People raising money for young people at the same time that if we went to the ballot box in the South in representative numbers, we could break the neck of the hillbilly horde who is starving those HBCUs and get those billions of dollars that we are owed by putting different people in. You're gonna tell me you're not gonna work, not gonna go in the booth and pull one for Keisha Lance Bottoms in Georgia to become the governor, and then work to break the back of the hillbilly horde majority in the Georgia legislature because somehow you don't like her look. You don't like what she said here. Meanwhile, this punk Collins is running around, and because he had stopped by a Negro establishment, y'all want to drag the establishment for filth. He's a white nationalist. He was down there with Bozo at a high school this week. A high school there talking reckless and crazy. And you want to you want to worry about funding students? At the public HBCUs, this is what you do. You go to the ballot box and break the back of the hillbilly horde that's been starving them of our tax dollars in that state. Not even income tax. They getting your ass at the booth when they start talking about state tax. Everybody pays the damn value tax when you pay for a candy bar or some gas, and they turn around and give that money to whoever the hell they want to give it to, and not your children. There's a way to break their back. But in the short term, and in the long term, we have jailbroken the university and doing the thing here that can drive education, and it is beginning to drive education. It's contributing to the others who are driving education outside and inside of those spaces. That's the governance constant. That's the governance form. The third of our conceptual categories, ways of knowing. What are the relationships, or what are some relationships between myth, memory, and vision? Afrofuturism is great. Why do you go see the Odyssey? Why do you keep going? Where are the African myths? You know, Black Panther was all about African myths. You know, Ludwig scored that movie too. All the movies Ryan Coogler did. The same guy who made the music for the Odyssey made it for Black Panther. And I'm all down for Afrofuturism. I'm for the Afrofuturism that is deeply grounded in Afro memory. So you don't have to make up a Wakanda that's completely devoid of study. And Ryan Coogler didn't. Ryan and Zenzi Kruger did. But where are the African myths, and how do we explore the ways of knowing that we live by every day as culturally informed ways contained in racial containers? They look like Black containers, but these are African ways of knowing that are in these containers that we have labeled Black, which creates an unnecessary tension between Africans from other places, particularly the continent of Africa, and Africans in the Western Hemisphere, particularly the United States. You say, I'm not Black. You know, you're African in terms of your cultural meaning making, in terms of your ways of knowing, in terms of your movement and memory. What you can't identify with is the racialized label that has been affixed primarily on the Africans of the United States of America. And guess what? I'm in agreement, because I'm not Black either. But you would also reject African, which I can kind of understand as well, because that too is not a label that we had. In fact, there's a new book that just came out that I'm going to refer to again in a moment. Here it is, called Atlas's Bones, The African Foundation of Europe. Now, this is D. Vance Smith. It's a great book, Princeton University Press. He's at Princeton University, this University of Chicago Press. I'm learning a lot in this book, but I'm also seeing the omissions. See, the thing about European social structure educational institutions is that the things that other people have been thinking about and writing about and teaching about and studying about for years, they will ignore or may not even be aware of, or certainly wouldn't value, when they then discover something similar enough that they can say, oh, look at what you discovered. No, this book, Atlas's Bones, could have been written by ASCAP scholars generations ago. What you think Joseph Ben-Yakin and John Clark were talking about? What do you think Jacob Carruthers and Asa Hilliard were talking about? What do you think Sharcy McIntyre and Zingarata Bisha Heru were talking? What do you think Wade Nobles and Leonard Jeffries and Rosalind Jeffries were talking and working about? What do you think Benachi Montgomery and Joseph Ben Levi were working and talking about? What do you think that Yvonne Jones and Ife Carruthers, Roosevelt Roberts were thinking and talking about? What you think? No, don't get me started. This ain't nothing new, but it's got Chicago on there. University of Chicago on the spine. So therefore, it's now, we used to call this the good white sources. I'll come back to this in a minute because it tracks with we're going to talk about in a moment about the Odysseys we come. But science and technology is making it possible for us to have our virtual convening. Shout out to all the people in Philadelphia Freedom Schools. We had a virtual Mbongi this week with 2 sites in Philadelphia Freedom Schools, which are national and global. Sister Ashery Hines still in Ghana right now. On the day we had the convening, the virtual Mbongi this past Wednesday, she was on her way back from Cape Coast, Elmina, the dungeons where many of our ancestors were shipped out, her first trip there. And I want to say to my daughter that I'm so proud of you. You're not a replacement, you're an upgrade. Just like my daughter Shanice Thompson is, just like Stephanie Joy Tisdale is, just like Angie Porter, and so many. Y'all are upgrades. This is how we do this work, but that work is not connected to the university. That university's been jailbroken. Mike Leake, man, Yofi Zazinho, man, y'all are upgrades. You understand? And to be an upgrade is to take the responsibility of taking this forward. So that Afrofuturism is very important. It's got to be tied to Afro memory. Otherwise, it gets mistakenly tied, as too many people writing about Black Panther tied to the Greeks. There's a new book out on here's how T'Challa and Wakanda, this metaphor. We can look at classical mythology, which means white. And then they say, oh yeah, in classical mythology, you ain't even read the comic books where they're working hard to tie this to freaking ways of knowing, but you just really go straight to the Greeks, straight to the Romans. I understand your master is so compelling and you haven't been taught anything different. Let's turn to that finally in cultural meaning making and movement and memory. Let's address the Odyssey. Let's contrast it a little bit. You know, the Odyssey, the story, of course, the story attributed to the group of mouth to ear memory makers that collectively are known as Homer, from maybe the 7th or 8th century before the Common Era, before the birth of Christ. The Odyssey, the story of, you know, after the Iliad, the great so-called Trojan War. And then Odysseus, Ulysses, fighting his way to get back home. Spoiler alert, ain't no spoiler alert. Hell, everybody, all y'all had to read it on your knees in school at some point. George Clooney, I'm not sorry, I say George Clooney. Oh my God, George Clooney. An Odysseus of a different type. Actually, George Clooney is the Odysseus, isn't he? He's the Ulysses in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? So George Clooney is the Matt Damon for the version of the Odyssey that I prefer because it's so fantastic to me. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Set in the 1930s, United States in the South. I guess a proxy for Mississippi, really, is a satirical send-up of the Odyssey, because in the Odyssey, Odysseus is a hero. His wife, this beautiful woman, waiting while all these slimy suitors are trying to marry her. The gods are in his favor. Are they in his favor? You killed all his men. Yeah, they're Greek gods, which means what? They nasty like the culture that produced them. In other words, the divine is not trending toward truth, justice, reciprocity, balance, order, like Ma'at. No, the divine is fighting toward, we just like y'all. I'm gonna turn into a cow and I'm gonna have sex with you, and then this and I'm gonna turn into a swan over here, and I don't like my brother, so I'm gonna eat his children. What the hell? The Africans looking like the Europeans, like, what the hell is wrong with y'all? Y'all guys be fighting each other? Well, kind of. But although, you know, and then the Greeks look at the Africans, look and say, yeah, well, you know, we came from y'all. So we basically wayward children. Read the opening passages of the Iliad, which precedes the Odyssey. The story that they did flashbacks on in the Odyssey movie to give you enough context. If you hadn't read the Iliad or know the Odyssey or the Iliad, you knew where this fight came from. The Trojan horse, the Trojan War, the whole Iliad to begin with. Agamemnon, those cats, you know how it works. In cultural meaning making, let's think about this. Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? By the Coen brothers, set in the 1930s in the United States during the Depression, is a satirical Depression era retelling of the Odyssey. In fact, Martin Bernal and Milty and Office Hours was talking about these volumes a couple of months ago. This is the more recent republishing through Rutgers University Press of the 3-volume Black Athena. This is Martin Bernal, the late Martin Bernal. He didn't finish the project, 3 volumes of a projected, I think it was 5. But he says this in volume 1. He calls the Odyssey, let me just say, he says, another reason, if you get this volume 1 here, Black Athena. So it was Black Athena long before there was a Zendaya playing her. Zendaya. Black Athena, the Afro-Asiatic Roots of Classical Civilization, Volume 1. The Falsification of Ancient Greece, 1785 to 1985. Good white source, as we used to say. He says, another reason, page 94, another reason given for placing Homer in the late 8th or 7th century is that the Odyssey is largely set to the west of Greece. And it is argued that the Greeks could not have known about the central Mediterranean before their colonization of Sicily and southern Italy at the end of the 8th century. Bernal writes, I think that it is in many ways useful to look at this epic, the Odyssey, as a Greek version of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Wait for it, and that in both Egyptian and Greek cosmology, the Western islands of the sunset were associated with the underworld and astral realms of the dead. Even without this hypothesis, however, it is clear that there was considerable Mycenaean trade to the west in the Bronze Age, and that even if Greeks were not directly involved, they must have been aware of the Phoenician dealings with the West Mediterranean in the 11th, 10th, and 9th centuries BC. Now, the reason I read that is because I like Bernal saying, Think of the Odyssey as like a Greek version of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, because they haven't even been that far. But you know, in the telling, then in the books, and ultimately in this movie, the idea of the West, the Westerners, which is central to Africana ways of knowing, central to ancient African ways of the sun sets in the West. Remember, Odysseus is he going to the West. Eventually, now at the end of the movie, him and the queen, they going out to honor the dead. Where you going? Going to the West. That ain't no Greek thing. The Greeks picked that up. Did they get it directly from the Egyptian, or did they get it to the hero of these volumes, for Martin Bernal, which is the Phoenicians, who traveled throughout the region? Story, Phoenician script, right? The combination of things which ultimately end with the alphabet as we know it, but begin life, among other places, in ancient Egypt in the hieroglyphs. This is an African story that has been heard and repeated and adapted to the cultural meaning making of other people. Nothing wrong with that. Now, in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, set in the 1930s in the United States, the hero there, George Clooney, is skewered. Ulysses becomes Ulysses Everett. He's a ne'er-do-well. He's obsessed with appearance, besting dumber co-travelers, manipulating his comrades, displaying his superior intellect. He doesn't have a war-tested army. He got Tim Blake Nelson and Turturro. And what they're doing is they're escaped convicts. And in escaping, they're looking for a fake treasure, a treasure that really doesn't exist. What does George Clooney want to do? What does Ulysses want to do? He want to get back to his wife, Penny, who's being courted by this slimy Vernon T. Waltrip, who's a stand-in for all the suitors in the Odyssey, eating up the food because of what they call it, the generosity of Zeus. And Spider-Man sits there and bristles, or Zendaya's husband is sitting there and bristling. It's a cute story about how he got cast. He brought the script home. She reads it and was like, wow. And then he comes home and tells her that Nolan wants her to play Athena. And I'm like, dude, could she have played Athena in a way that was more true to Athena? Because after all, in fact, if you go to this book, which I'll hold up now, and I'll mention in a moment again, Becoming Worthy Ancestors. I got this actually in South Africa. Golela Manku. I bought this actually at Exclusive Books in South Africa probably about 10 years ago. But Martin Bernal has a chapter in here called Africa and Europe, Egypt and Greece, chapter 4. And before people's heads blow off, please understand that I knew John Clark and Joseph Ben Yakin in and out of them. And so I'm very well aware that much of what Martin Bernal is writing about had been discussed by African scholars that predate him, had that conversation many times. And St. Clair Drake writing in Black Folk Here and There, volume 1? Yeah, I think beginning of volume 1. He writes about the end of volume, talks about the old scrappers, what Anderson Thompson used to, thinking about his article, the great Anderson Thompson. I'm pointing like my thumb back here because back here the issue of the Compass, the Journal of ASCAP, with Dr. Thompson's essay in it. What Martin Bernal, he refers to all those Black scholars that predated him as the old scrappers. But again, when they write books now, like Atlas's Bones, they don't quote none of them Black scholars. They will quote Bernal because Bernal is considered one of them good white sources, and they can't really get around him. But in chapter 4 of this book, Becoming Worthy Ancestors, Martin Bernal, the author of Black Athena, writes in chapter 4, Africa and Europe, Egypt and Greece. At the end of it, he gives some of the names of the gods, which he thinks, and I think with good reason, come from Egypt. So you see Apollo there, but you also see Aphrodite, but you see Net, the temple of Net, the name of both the goddess Athena and her city, Nisut, which is one of the royal titles, king, ruler of Amun. Zeus, Nisut. Zeus, the king, the goodness of Zeus. These are, according to Bernal, these are Medu-Neter names. See, Net, temple of Net, the name of both the goddess Athena and her city, Athens and Athena, or Athene, in the Attic Greek. My point is that hey, Elon, if you make Athena other than Black, you messed up the myth, my friend. But then again, you get up off that drug, whatever you own, that yin yang, that Adderall, whatever, that morphine, whatever you own. You still don't care because it ain't about the facts. And how, as was said earlier, how do you, as Coleman Domingos, how you make a myth factual? So listen, you paint it any kind of way you want. I don't care. But the idea of the Odyssey is about exile, is about return, is about values. Here's why I'm bringing it all together. The monsters in the Odyssey are products of a hostile divine force in the movie and in the story it's based on. A fundamental European way of knowing that assumes foundational hostility in society, that assumes the foundational hostility of nature. Everything exists to fight everything else, and you just get what you can and move forward. That is a nasty Western concept that has trickled right down to us and to this idea that I'm achieving and I'm going to kill everybody I need to kill. And when I get there, I'll rule over everybody, but I'll be benevolent. That's a worldview Tony Brown was talking about rejecting. In the Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Like in Sinners, the movie Sinners, the monsters are white nationalism, would threaten both Africans. Remember the Klan? The Klan is prominent in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And the poor whites. And remember, in the Nolan movie, the Cyclops lives in the cave with the sheep and he's eating the people and all this kind of thing. In Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The Cyclops is played by John Goodman. With the eye patch, his eye is put out after they are able to shoot a flaming flag into the air because they see the Cyclops, John Goodman, in a Klan rally in the middle of the night. Oh, Dave, the guy singing, and and George Clooney and Chris Thomas King and Tim Blake Nelson and John Turturro are in the bushes looking. And by the way, the black man, Robert Johnson character, known as Tommy Johnson, he ain't no escaped convict in that sense. He with them because he black. His skin is his conviction. So anyway, his criminality. So they watching this damn Klan rally, and the guy becomes a Cyclops. You don't put the eye out. He got an eye patch because you attacked him to escape the Klan rally because they go lynch the brother. One of the two major black formations in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? So the enemies there are not the gods. They're going to need divine intervention. The enemies are very real people, just like in Sinners. When the vampire tries to tell him, we got the same enemy, but I want your stories. I want your songs. We're coming to these songs. Because in Ryan Coogler's telling, maybe ain't no good white people. And Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Is more of a class rendering. It's these people who are preying on the poor. Because remember, Big Dan Teague, played by John Goodman, the Cyclops, is a Klansman. Who else is a Klansman that night? The damn political candidate, Homer Stokes, who wants to be the governor in the state, the southern state. The one that's being led right then by Pappy O'Daniel. Pappy O'Daniel is the other guy. He's not with the Klan directly, but the Klansman wants to take his position because Pappy O'Daniel ain't racist enough. Oh, what are we talking about here? Pappy O'Daniel, maybe like the establishment Democrats today, the soft white nationalists, are astute enough to recognize to hold on to power, you want to maybe pick off some of those so-called Trump voters, those quote unquote independents you thinking of. You want to you don't want to get too far away from them. So you're scared of these people of color who are you want to call them socialists, democratic socialists, Mamdani or Chris Rabb in Pennsylvania or Kiros in Colorado. So you have an internal struggle over whether or not you're going to go with them or not. But who saves these people? The collective saves them in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The common people, bound in their oppression, bound in their suffering. In the Christopher Nolan movie, there ain't no collective. There's one hero, Odysseys, and he trying to get back to his wife and honor his men that he done put in harm's way the whole time, trying to get it there, his wife. Where are the other people's wives? Where are the other soldiers' families? It ain't about that. It's about Odysseus trying to get what he wants, that rugged individualism. And I want all y'all to die and sacrifice for me. And Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The collective is there suffering too. The theme song that goes throughout the movie, I am a man of constant sorrow. I've seen trouble all my days. I bid farewell, oh, to old Kentucky. The place where I was born and raised. Then they come in, the place where he was born and raised. I'm listening to the Blue Note. I'm listening to this African Blue Note commingle with that Appalachian music. And when these convicts with the string backing who leads into the song of the black man on the guitar, who's representing the cat who they say sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads, to be able to play like that, think about Preacher Boy and Sinners, record something and they call themselves the Soggy Bottom Boys. And that song keeps them out of the abyss. There is other music, of course, in the movie. Remember the sirens? Go to sleep, little baby. This is an old brother, where out there. They calling these men in these convicts, they calling them into the water, and they under the trance. Now, George Clooney staying out of it. Ulysses like, remember how he put his wax in the ears when they was riding here in the Christopher Nolan movie and the story is based on? But in this story, they all in the water, and he's able to save them out, but then that song comes back. Where does that song come back? They hear not the sirens singing, but the Christians singing, and they go back in that water. I went down to the river to pray, thinking about those good old ways when I would wear. And they coming in white robes. Oh, brother, let's go down. This is the Odyssey now. This is their Odyssey, and they're encountering these dangers all along. And as they go through, Tim Blake Nelson, the guy who played Pete, the convict, he comes out. He goes in the water. He goes down. They trying to resist it. He goes all the way down to the front of the line because they're getting baptized. Y'all know how he used to do it. And the preacher takes him, puts him down. He comes back. He says, I've been washed of all my sins. That robbery I committed. George Clooney was like, you said you didn't do that robbery. What's his response? He says, well, I did. And I was alive. But now I've been purged. It's a critique of Christianity. In fact, it's a critique of any belief system that would rely on somebody else to get you what you need. It's a critique of the Odyssey. Maybe there's a reason Zendaya stood there mute, because she can't help you, my friend. You think she is an African? You think she's an Orisha? You think she's a netter? She ain't got that kind of power. She's just Athena. So of course she's looking like, it's all good. And so in the Odyssey, all the soldiers die. And oh, brother, where art thou? The crew survives. They get full pardons because the soft white nationalists realizes, oh man, they were declaring. So what we gonna do? We're gonna run him out on the rail. Remember, the Soggy Bottom Boys show up and sing, and the people, the hillbillies, cheer. They cheer so hard they don't even recognize that one of these four is a black man, and he gets a pardon too. So this idea then that this career politician parlays power that's so powerful that they even let a Negro get off. But they get a pardon. None of them die in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And what does Tommy choose to do after that? That's what I want to know. What does the black figure, the Chris Thomas King is playing? What does Tommy Johnson, a riff on Robert Johnson, who Preacher Boy in some ways is a riff on, with that kind of sacred, secular, worried about that kind of, who also redeems himself in the water. You don't need to be saved by that. Give me my daddy's guitar. I'll split this vampire's head. But the point is that the other prominent Africans in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou are the Fairfield Four out of Nashville, Tennessee. That's where they were founded in the 1920s. This is the gospel group, the quartet, who are standing there as these men reach the end. And here's the confrontation. The damn police been chasing them the whole time in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? So the cop, the police with the shaded the sunglasses and the hound dog been chasing them. This guy is against them. He's representing the state. So the poor in the 1930s, you got the politicians exploiting them, these racists. You got the state exploiting them. And at the moment that they think they're about to escape, the police intervene. And they got nooses ready for them. And they make these black men dig their graves, historically accurate. And as they're digging the graves, these brothers start singing. This is a song I often find myself humming and even singing when I go into the tombs in the Valley of the Rulers in Kemet. I'll probably do it again in Luxor, in the tomb of Seti I, when they sing, you got to go to the lonesome valley. No one can go there for you. You got to go to the lonesome valley. Yes, sir. You got to go there by yourself. So as they are singing this song, these guys are digging this great. I think about it every time I'm descending that long slope in that huge tomb of Seti the First. It don't matter how many people you had or have, you got to go to the Lonesome Valley by yourself. But for the people of Kemet, there's something after that. And that something after that is everything. It's written on the walls. It's all around you. So as you're descending, it's not a sad moment. But in that moment, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Clooney and them think they about to die. So they praying, and what saves them? What saves sinner? What saved a preacher boy? What saves you? The water. In the Odyssey, the water your enemy. Why? Because you done killed Poseidon's son, and so he gonna whirl the water, and then you lied to your man. You got Scylla and Carbotus, then missed the whirlpool, then this monster starts snatching them out the boat. And he's like, man, you didn't tell us about that. So if I told y'all about it, y'all wouldn't have come. But the water saves them. Even as the water tried to kill them early in the movie, the water comes washing through, washes that whole cop thing away, and here we go. He's able ultimately, Clooney is Odysseus or Ulysses, reclaim his wife. We don't know what happens to the others. They're free, they've been pardoned. And then in the last scene, whereas in the Odyssey by Christopher Nolan, you got the badly misused, I suppose you could say, although he did get Travis Scott to sing the song at the end with the other guys. But you get at the end of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The place it began with. The guy who can't see, almost like a Tiresias character in the Odyssey. The black man who's on the rail car thing, which you pump and go down the rail, just driving past. This is how the story goes. It's fascinating when you contrast those two stories, when you contrast those two, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And the Christopher Nolan movie, which are both tellings and then retellings and satirical critiques of the movie of the story of Odysseus, the Odyssey. What you see is that one is the statement of that archetype, that myth, that European myth. The other is a social structure critiquing of the myth. And when you see those peek-throughs of Africans, they are actually in some ways Africanizing that myth, although we don't get the chance to bring it all home, which is where I'm about to do now. For 5 minutes, we're going to close out. In this story of the same journey, except 1,000 years before there was even the concept of a Trojan War, which leads me to say, with Martin Bernal, maybe you should look at that Greek Odyssey as an echo version of what the Egyptians did, since we know there was the contact and much of the influence, which is what is being discussed at length in this book, Atlas's Bones, the African Foundation of Europe. He got a whole section on the African influence on Greece. In fact, let me just show you, because he starts with chapter 1. Egypt, the exception, ancient and medieval, reading Africa. Chapter 2, Africa, fulcrum of the epic. Chapter 3, the specter of Carthage. This is where he gets into Horace and them. Chapter 2 is where he talks about the Iliad and then the Odyssey, and he goes on. But the whole point of this book he makes is that much of what we attribute to being European myth making, in fact, let me just read it. He says, in Atlas's Bones, D. Vance Smith reveals that much of what is claimed as European culture up to the Middle Ages, its great themes in literature, its sources in political thought, its religious beliefs, originated in the writing of African thinkers like Augustine, Fuglentius, and Martinius Capella, of Europeans who thought extensively about Africa. In fact, a third of Virgil's Aeneid takes place in Africa. And remember, in the Iliad, they start by saying the gods went home to Africa, to Ethiopia, to dine, because that's where they came from. I'm talking about the Greek gods. But he then goes on to say how Europe created a false medieval version of Africa to acquire resources and power during the eras of imperialism and colonialism, what we read about in Howard French's book, Born in Blackness. He says the first half of the book, Reading Africa, traces Egypt's, Libya's, and Carthage's influence on classical and medieval thinking about Africa, highlighting often ignored literary and legendary traditions. For example, that Alexander the Great named himself the son of an African god. The second part, Writing Africa, focuses on how the different cultures of the two great African cities, Carthage and Alexandria, he's talking about North Africa there. But in the beginning of the book, he's talking about Greece and takes it back to Egypt. When you read that in tandem with Martin Bernal, you get a better sense. But as I said, I'm going to end not with any of that. I'm going right to the source, the Africans. In this book, Sanhat, which is the transliteration of a story called The Story of Sinhue, let's contrast. Odysseus is a warrior king involved in the Trojan War. This is a whole beef when it's, Agamemnon's brother goes to avenge after Helen is kidnapping her sister. Now, this is the Lupita thing they all mad about. Don't be mad. In fact, forget that. Cast whoever the hell you want. I'm not even tripping because it's beautiful gowns, friends. It's beautiful gowns. In Sinhue, you got a royal court official. You can call him the Odysseys figure. But he flees Kemet after the assassination of the pharaoh. Pharaoh been killed, and they think you in it, so you run. Odysseus goes in a nonsense war over some bullshit, and with the gods playing both sides. Okay, both of them, Sinhue or Sanhat in the Kemetic, and Odysseus are trying to get home after the incidents. But Sinhue, in contrast to Odysseus, who then killed people, been killed, Trojan horse, all that kind of stuff, spill blood, mad about it later, ambiguity, all them themes that permeate Western literature. He trying to get home. Sinhue, who left in exile, actually made real good in the foreign country. He rose through the ranks, became a military advisor, and wealthy. But they trying to get home. Why are they trying to come home? Odysseus trying to get to his wife and her loving arms. And then he's ultimately going to sail to honor his men, who he sold out by taking through all this bullshit to get to his wife. Sinhue, you know why he's trying to get back? He's trying to get back because he is trying to die in Egypt. He's done quite well in exile, but he wants to come back. And when he comes back home, he wants to now transition. You've got to go to that lonesome valley. But beyond that lonesome valley is everlasting, eternal beingness, ancestorhood. He wants, in other words, to become a worthy ancestor. You see the worldview shift there? He wants to join that collective. And so the divine powers of Greece, they fight each other. Poseidon versus Athena versus Zeus. And whereas the divine power in Kemet is trained on what comes beyond physical death, prompting Sinhue or Sanhat here to yearn for return so that he can become a proper ancestor. You got to understand that's how it works. Odysseus is returning for life, physical life. Sanhat is returning for greater life, sometimes known as death. The memory is to honor. Odysseus trying to honor his men who he sacrificed. Sinhue is like, I'm going to join them because ancestors are those who are coming before you, who you're going to join. When home, Sinhue is accepted. He rejects the foreign cultural influence. He comes back, and in a famous line that Jacob Carruthers used to end most of his speeches with, he says, come back to Kemet. Kemet translated as the black land, literal translation. Whether that's the color of the soil or the people, that is the translation. Come back to the black land. Gather with your friends. Come to the great gate. Kiss the ground and mingle with your friends. So in a way, it's like, man, I've been away all these years because y'all thought I helped y'all to kill a pharaoh. It's a new pharaoh said, nah, man. No, bro. We know you didn't do it. Come on back. Come back to the black land. In contrast, George Clooney got to come in his house and kill everybody in there with the help of Spider-Man. Get the beautiful gowns. Beautiful gowns. But my point is movement and memory. Now we end with this. The reinforcement of a memory that still connects to the trauma as foundation gets us a dead end. There's no reason to black up Odysseus when you got stories 1,000 years older that speak to our common humanity and our ways of knowing. What happens if we don't do that? What happens if we don't have that structural grounding to shift? Then we lose the possibility of a momentum of memory. I see the reinscription of that in this Christopher Nolan movie. It's what Maleficent used to call a lynched text, a text that strangles the possibilities of different ways of knowing before they can be born. The result, look at what we end up doing. We end up fighting over dead end possibilities because we haven't accepted the idea that community has always been at the center of how we should and how we have viewed our possibility as human beings. That is our discussion, not whether or not somebody's a democratic socialist or not whether somebody's electable or not, but how is this going to advance our common humanity? So let's move away in our Black Odysseys from these white facts and from these myths that will only lead us further away from the better ways of being in the world as human beings. And all went long, probably, but that was, man.
Yes. All
I'm just saying.
okay, the echo's back. So I'm
back. I'm putting it back.
That's all right. We're just gonna say goodbye.
Yep. Oh yeah, I gotta remind people. Tomorrow at can we hear? I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, we can. Now we can. Okay.
Now we can't. At 4:00 tomorrow Eastern time, Sankofa is doing, I think they're live streaming it. We're doing a conversation, Sylvia Hill, Twigs, Dipu, and myself. We're doing a conversation on the 50th anniversary of Soweto, the Soweto uprising. And we'll talk about what that means for today. It's one of a series. Sankofa has something going on just about every day, but I'm glad I'll be there. Hadi Karima is going to be in Philly for the Black Star Film Network, talking about his latest documentary, Black Lions, Roman Wolves. But that's going to be the first week of August. But anyway, tomorrow, if y'all want to come by, also today, Greer Books. So Adesoji and I are going to be talking about Black Skins, White Masks at noon. So you want to look for Adesoji Speaks Knowledge. Y'all know, you can find it on YouTube. And then Monday night, we're finishing up. Monday night is our conversation, and we're in conversation with Howard French's text, the second reconstruction, the coda, the final piece, and we'll wrap it up for a couple of hours being in conversation. That's all I want to say. Thank you, Prof. I know we went longer, but I mean, the Odyssey, I was thinking about the Odyssey. Great. Hey, y'all go see it though. I ain't mad at it. It's a beautiful film. Yeah, but
All right.
just some thoughts. All right.
Awesome. See y'all next week.
See y'all next week. Bye.